If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, The Black Family's Twin Stars. November 3, 1959. The delivery room at 12 Grimmauld Place was thick with tension, the air heavy and close. Regulus Black lay on the four-poster bed, sweat soaking through her long hair. 3 witches skilled in healing magic stood around her, their robes embroidered with the Black family crest. In the fireplace, a deep indigo flame burned. The color of a family ritual. Push, Madam, Elma, the chief healer. When the clock struck its 11th chime past midnight, a baby's cry tore through the silence. Orion Black stood at the bedside, his expression solemn. He wore dark green robes, the Black family brooch pinned at his collar. At 30, he was already the 13th head of house. Regulus smiled weakly. "Let me hold him." The baby was placed in her arms. She lowered her gaze to the wrinkled little face, her fingers brushing the dark down of hair on his forehead, the kind that would one day curl stubbornly no matter how it was cut. "His name?" Orion asked. Regulus answered without hesitation. "Sirius. The brightest star in the night sky. A guide that never loses its way. He will lead the Black family to new glory." The portraits on the walls nodded in quiet approval. A female ancestor in a Victorian high collar spoke softly, "A good name. But remember, even the brightest star can be hidden by a storm." "Welcome to the Black family, Sirius," Orion whispered as he bent close. "May you be worthy of the name." The nursery at 12 Grimmauld Place occupied the east wing of the 3rd floor. Deep green carpet covered the floor, and animated tapestries lined the walls, each one depicting the triumphs of Black ancestors. One had tamed a Peruvian viper tooth. Another had defended Gringotts during a goblin rebellion. Another portrait looked down at the room with arrogant satisfaction. He had once served as Minister of Magic, though only for 4 months before being forced to resign. One afternoon, when Sirius was 10 months old, Regulus was entertaining her sister Druella Black in the adjoining room. Creaker stood by the cradle, his long fingers smoothing the silk bedding. Sirius pulled himself up by the railing, wobbling on unsteady legs that could not support him for long. Still, he stood there, grey eyes fixed on a silver bell toy lying on the carpet 3 feet away. He reached out. The bell rolled toward him by half an inch. Creaker sucked in a sharp breath, then immediately began slamming his head against the nearest table leg. "Bad Creaker. Didn't notice the young master's magic awakening. Bad. Bad." Regulus burst into the room, her face radiant. He stood up. "At 10 months. Orion, did you see?" Orion paused in the doorway, something conflicted flickering across his face. "Too early. His magic is awakening too early." "It's talent," Regulus said, scooping Sirius into her arms and pressing kiss after kiss to his cheeks. "My little Sirius, you were born for greatness." From that day on, pure blood education began. Every afternoon, Regulus would sit with Sirius before the family tapestry that covered an entire wall, woven in gold and silver thread with 1,000 years of Black lineage. Some branches were scorched black, names burned away like ugly scars. "Look here," Regulus said, pointing to the top. "This is our first ancestor. He laid the foundation of our family." By the time Sirius turned 1, he could already speak in full sentences. One afternoon, he pointed at a charred name on the tapestry and asked, "What happened there?" Regulus' expression darkened. "That was your great-aunt Cedrella. She committed an unforgivable mistake. She married blood traitors. Her name was burned away and erased from the family. Never make such a mistake, Sirius." January 15, 1961. The winter of 1961 was especially harsh. Snow blanketed London's streets, and thin ice formed along the edges of the Thames. Inside 12 Grimmauld Place protective magic kept the rooms warm as spring. Regulus' second labor was far more difficult than the first. The pain began just after midnight on January 14 and lasted a full 16 hours. At 3 in the morning on January 15, her screams reached their peak. Then came a baby's cry, softer than Sirius's had been, shorter, almost restrained. Orion stepped forward at once. "His name?" Regulus looked down at the unusually quiet child in her arms. He stared back with the Black family's signature grey eyes, calm as he took in the world around him. "Regulus," she said softly. "The heart of Leo. The second brightest star in the sky." Orion added the middle name himself. Regulus Arcturus Black. Walburga placed Regulus in the cradle and almost immediately fell into an exhausted sleep. Orion stood between the two cradles. On the left, 2-year-old Sirius slept deeply, one hand stretched through the bars, clutching his favorite silver bell. On the right, newborn Regulus lay quietly awake, his gaze fixed on the cradle opposite him. As if sensing something even in his sleep, Sirius shifted, turning toward his younger brother. Regulus's eyes followed him. That was Sirius. The boy who would one day betray the family for his beliefs and die beyond the veil. His brother. Deep in his soul, an adult consciousness from another world let out a silent sigh. Then, with an infant's undeveloped mind, he struggled to form his first clear thought. I won't repeat Regulus's tragedy. I'll walk a different path. Outside the window, the London night sky was unusually clear. Winter constellations stood sharp and bright. Orion hung high in the south, Taurus gleamed in the east, and between them shone the brightest star of the night, Sirius. Not far from it, Regulus flickered quietly in Leo, dimmer, but unwavering. On Sirius's second birthday, Walburga held a small celebration in the garden. Only close black relatives were invited, but the event was lavish all the same. House elves used magic to make roses bloom in winter. Silver cutlery lifted itself into neat arrangements. Even the garden fountain had been temporarily enchanted to spray lemon juice, simply because Sirius liked sour things. During the party, Regulus sat on Walburga's lap. He wore an elegant dark green velvet infant outfit, a tiny silver brooch pinned at the collar. He wasn't looking at anyone, his gaze fixed on the distance. What is he staring at? Walburga followed her son's line of sight to the garden wall, thick with ancient vines. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Probably the light on the leaves, Druella guessed. Sunlight on dew. It sparkles. But where Regulus was looking, a nest of bowtruckles hid deep among the vines. The tiny creatures were invisible to ordinary people, and even most wizards would never notice them. Yet whenever they moved, the surrounding magic stirred, faint as a breath. Regulus could feel it. From Druella and Walburga's conversation, he guessed they could not. After that, Walburga hesitated for a long time. One afternoon, she finally asked Orion, her voice uncertain, "Do you think?" Regulus is a bit slow to react. At 1 year and 3 months old, Sirius could already run through the house and speak in full sentences. Regulus, by contrast, was unusually quiet. He rarely made noise and responded slowly to outside stimuli. Orion set down the Daily Prophet and went to the nursery, Walburga following close behind. Regulus sat on the carpet with a magical picture book spread open before him. It was fantastic magical creatures, meant for children 3 and older. A hippogriff beat its wings on the page. A dirical vanished and reappeared without warning. Orion watched for 10 minutes. Then he crouched down in front of his son, meeting his eyes, and said to Walburga, "Look at his eyes." Walburga knelt as well, studying Regulus's gaze, but saw nothing unusual. "He isn't slow," Orion continued. "He's listening. Watching. Learning. Observing. He's just quiet." As if to prove the point, Regulus lifted his head and, for the first time, looked directly at his father. Grey eyes met grey eyes. Walburga didn't fully understand, but she let out a quiet breath of relief. She trusted her husband's judgment. Her son was not slow. Chapter 2, The Silent Regulus. In the fall of 1962, Regulus was 1.5 years old, and Sirius Black was 3. The nursery had split into 2 worlds. Sirius's side looked like a small disaster zone, toy broom parts scattered across the floor, a box of goblin-made metal puzzles spilled open like someone had tried to wage war on it. Regulus's corner, meanwhile, stayed tidy. A few picture books sat neatly on a deep blue rug, along with a stuffed cat raccoon doll that didn't move anymore. It used to, until Sirius had played with it too hard and broken the charm. That afternoon, Creaker was cleaning the windows with magic, but his ears were angled toward the 2 young masters. Even his eyes kept sliding back, tracking what they were doing. Because Sirius had just brought a miniature broom into the nursery, something he'd taken from Orion's study. It was a shrunken model of a real broom, a teaching tool used to demonstrate how flight charms worked. "Watch this, Regulus!" Sirius shouted, loud enough to demand attention. "It's a broom. A real wizard broom. I can make it float." He placed it on the carpet, backed up 2 steps, and sucked in a deep breath. His cheeks were already turning red from the effort. Up! He yelled, throwing both hands upward as if he could lift it by force alone. The broom trembled. One end rose maybe 5 degrees, then dropped back down. Up! Up! Sirius tried twice more. This time the broom rolled half a turn in place, but it still didn't lift. Kreaker held his breath. He knew the broom had been layered with a limiting charm. Only someone who truly understood the levitation charm, who could picture weight disappearing, could activate it. Orion used it to test a child's instinct for magic. Sirius thought he'd stolen it, but that was exactly what Orion had wanted. And Sirius very clearly didn't understand it yet. Why won't it work? Sirius kicked the carpet, furious. Dad can make it fly. That was when Regulus moved. He pushed himself up from the rug, quicker than he usually was, walked over to the broom, and plopped down beside it. Sirius watched him and curled his lip. You want to try? You can't even talk. Regulus didn't bother looking at him. He just extended his right index finger, hovering it over the broom. Then he pointed down, lightly. The broom rose at a slow, steady pace. When it reached eye level, it hung there in the air, perfectly still. Sirius's mouth fell open. The cloth Kreaker was controlling dropped straight to the floor. Regulus pressed his finger down again, just as gently, and the broom lowered back to the carpet, settling into the exact same spot it had started from. Sirius stammered, how did you? He couldn't make sense of it. How could his little brother do what he couldn't? Regulus finally turned his head. His voice was young but clear, and he spoke his first full sentence. Think, then do. Think what? Sirius asked automatically. Think it's light, Regulus said, pointing at the broom. Don't think it's heavy. But it is heavy. Think it isn't. How's that even possible? Regulus tilted his head, like he was searching for the right way to explain it. Then he patted the carpet beside him. Sit. Sirius sat down without thinking, so caught up in the moment that it didn't even register how cleanly his brother had spoken. Regulus picked up a leaf that had drifted in through the window and placed it in his palm. This is light. Yet. Think it's heavy. Sirius stared at the leaf, trying to picture it as heavy as a stone. Nothing happened. Wrong, Regulus said, as if he could see right into Sirius's thoughts. Don't think, it's heavy like something. Forget it's light. Then it's heavy. Sirius frowned. It was too abstract. He'd never tried to imagine things that way before. He scratched his head, completely lost. Regulus wobbled to his feet and went back to his corner, leaving Sirius alone to wrestle with it. Regulus had done what he came to do. For a 3-year-old, that kind of understanding was still too early. For him, it was different. Age had never been a limit when it came to comprehension. After dinner, Orion summoned Kreaker to his study. That teaching broom? Orion asked, seated behind his desk, brow tight with suspicion. Regulus made it levitate. Yes, master, Kreaker said, twisting his tea towel until his knuckles went white. Young Master Regulus lifted it. 1 foot. Very steady. And he spoke. He said a few things. Kreaker repeated what Regulus had told Sirius. When he finished, Orion went quiet for a long time. The ancestor portraits on the study walls pretended to look elsewhere, but every one of them was listening. From now on, Orion said at last, whatever Regulus wants to do, as long as it isn't dangerous, let him. Watch him, record it, and report to me every day before dinner. Yes, master. In December of 1963, 12 Grimmauld Place was preparing for Christmas. Sirius Black had turned 4 a month earlier, and he'd entered that age where he was convinced the world existed to admire him. He planted himself in the center of the drawing room, hands on his hips, and made an announcement to the half-decorated Christmas tree. I'm gonna make the bells ring all by themselves. From the 2nd floor, Walburga leaned over the railing. Sirius, don't start trouble. Kreaker, hang the silver baubles higher. Last year they were too low and Andromeda nearly hit her head. Yes, my lady. Kreaker lifted the silver ornaments higher with a flick of his long fingers. Regulus sat on the thick rug by the fireplace, so still he might as well have been a fern someone forgot in the corner. The soul from another world had been in this body for 3 years now. He'd accepted the reality of it. This was a world of magic, and he was Regulus Black, the early dead tragedy from the original story. But he had no intention of reliving that tragedy. He had bigger goals. The stars. The universe. Things the original story never even brushed against. As for Sirius, let him be, Regulus thought. He'd grow up to be a champion of justice, a hero who fought Voldemort. As long as I'm alive, the Black family's resources are my stepping stone. There's no point fighting with a 4-year-old. Regulus. Watch. Sirius's voice yanked him back. Sirius took a deep breath and fixed his glare on a golden bell near the top of the tree. He squeezed his face red again, both hands clawing at the air like he could grab the sound. Magic stirred. Move! Sirius shouted. Regulus's sense for magic was unnaturally sharp, like he had an extra set of senses. He could feel Sirius's magic surging, and he could tell it was about to tip out of control. Bang! The entire Christmas tree began to shake violently. The star topper fell and smacked Creaker on the head. Candy canes clattered into each other. Glass ornaments chimed and rattled. A strand of enchanted fairy lights that could change colors on its own suddenly started flashing wildly, so fast it looked like it was glitching. Stop! Stop! Walburga stormed down the stairs. Too late. Sirius startled at his own power. He tried to pull back, but he couldn't. Panic flooded his small face. He flailed, desperate, and the magic only became more unstable. Boom! 3 tall windows along the east side of the drawing room exploded at once. Glass sprayed outward, but the protective charms caught it, slowing and suspending the shards in midair. Without that, the entire street outside would have been hit. The chandelier swung wildly. Crystal drops slammed into each other, shrieking with the impact. Ah! The portraits screamed as one. Phineas Nigellus bellowed the loudest, "Savages! The Blacks truly have fallen." Walburga raised her wand and hit Sirius with a strong calming spell. He staggered back a few steps and collapsed onto the rug, staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. Walburga's expression was something to behold. Anger came first, sharp and immediate, but pride followed right on its heels. "Plenty of magic," she said, her tone oddly satisfied. "Wrong direction. Next time aim it at something useless, like the ugly vases your father collects." Sirius blinked, not understanding. He'd expected to be yelled at. Regulus closed his book. This was the problem with wizard children, he thought with a quiet sigh. Their magic rose and fell with their emotions, like a pressure cooker without a safety valve, always one wrong moment away from blowing. Creaker began cleaning up the mess. Walburga gave Sirius a complicated look, then turned and went back upstairs. Sirius sat on the carpet, staring at his hands, then at the shattered windows, then finally at Regulus. "I did it," he whispered. Regulus nodded. "You did." Chapter 3, The First Cry of Magic. 4 months later. March, 1964. Walburga threw a tea party. Officially, it was a spring gathering for the ladies of the family. Unofficially, it was Walburga shoving her sons in everyone's faces to prove they were superior. Bellatrix showed up first. She was 13 and already acted like she owned whatever room she walked into. Dark green velvet dress, not a wrinkle in sight. Hair yanked back so tight it probably hurt. Eyes scanning the parlor like she was looking for something to criticize. "Heard you blew up the sitting room," she said, walking straight up to Sirius. Sirius stuck his chin out. "I can control it now." Andromeda and Narcissa came in behind their mother. Andromeda was 9, soft-spoken, and she smiled at Regulus as she passed. Narcissa was 8 and didn't even glance at him, too busy silently judging the new curtains. The tea started. The adults talked about the usual garbage. Ministry appointments. Some pure-blood engagement where the groom's bloodline wasn't great but his vault made up for it. The kids got stuck at a smaller table with tiny silverware and delicate cups. The whole setup screamed sit here and behave. Sirius, predictably, had zero interest in behaving. Regulus had other things on his mind. He'd been chewing on a question for a while now. Vera Verto made you picture a specific shape when you transformed something. But what if you didn't care about the shape? What if you just wanted to change what something was? If you skipped the visualization entirely, what would magic even do? "Watch this," Sirius announced. He glared at his spoon. Hard. Magic flared. The spoon bent. Slow, smooth, curving exactly how he wanted. Sirius lit up. Pride all over his face. He pushed harder just a bit more, it'd look even cooler. Too much. The spoon bent a little too far, and the neat curve turned into a twisted mess. He flinched. Shot a look at Bellatrix to see if she noticed. That half-second of distraction was enough. His control snapped. Magic exploded out of him like a shaken bottle finally popping. It slammed into everything on the table. Regulus felt the violent fluctuation at once. He looked up just in time to see every piece of silverware on the table begin to discolor. The silver sheen drained away, replaced by a fleshy pink. Ringed patterns surfaced along the metal. They turned into worms. 12 thick, pink earthworms writhed across the tablecloth. Every adult head snapped around. Walburga's face went from flushed to paper white in about half a second. Druella set down her teacup with the careful precision of someone trying very hard not to scream. Bellatrix raised an eyebrow, looking absolutely delighted. She lifted a hand to her mouth in fake shock. Oh my! Sirius froze. He stared at the worms like he couldn't process that he'd done this. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Walburga's hand moved toward her wand. Regulus saw her expression and understood immediately. This wasn't just anger about the party. This was humiliation. Losing face in front of her sisters. Great, Regulus thought. She's going to lose it, the party's ruined, Sirius gets screamed at, and I get to hear about this for the next 3 days. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked over to the kids' table and looked down at the pile of wriggling pink bodies. Had to admit, as accidental magic went, this was impressively thorough. His brain slid into that calm, cold space it always went to when he needed to think. Vera Verto didn't destroy material. It rearranged it. The silver was still there, just reorganized. If the base was intact, the path back existed too. Regulus raised his hand, palm down, hovering a few inches above the worms. He let his magic flow. It didn't feel like what he'd seen from other wizards. For them, magic seemed to run on emotion, instinct, and willpower. For him, it was just precise. Like he could sense the structure inside things. Trace the path without guessing. He didn't have to work himself into some emotional state and hope for the best. His thoughts built the model on their own where the magic should go, how hard to push. Sometimes he wondered if his brain worked like a computer. Some kind of processing unit crammed into a toddler's skull. Perk of being a transmigrator, he'd joked to himself once. Came with upgraded hardware. Silver light started bleeding out from inside the worms. They went still. One by one, they floated up off the tablecloth. Gravity apparently decided it didn't apply anymore. They formed a hexagon in midair, suspended and perfectly balanced. Regulus liked that. It felt right. Bellatrix leaned forward, eyes actually wide for once. Narcissus slapped a hand over her mouth. Andromeda breathed out, barely audible, Merlin. The reversal started. The worms tightened. Stretched. Silver pushed through from inside, shoving the flesh tones out like smoke clearing. 10 seconds later, cutlery. Spoons, forks, knives, cups, saucers, plates. All floating in the air, silver gleaming. Regulus flicked his fingers. The pieces floated back to their spots, weaving around each other like they knew exactly where to go. Everything landed exactly where it started. Well, almost everything. The original spoon, the one Sirius bent, still had a deep crease in it. The metal looked stressed. Regulus reached out and touched the fold. The structure needed to reset. Not melt, not warp. Just settle. Controlled heat. Enough to let the atoms find their places again without ruining the shape. His magic hummed, adjusting itself to match the silver. The metal responded. The crease smoothed out. 5 seconds later, the spoon was perfect. Regulus pulled his hand back, walked to his chair, sat down, picked up his biscuit, and took a bite. Face totally blank. Like none of that was on purpose. Like he definitely hadn't just flexed in front of every adult in the room. Inside? He was glowing. Obviously he could do it. Merlin's beard. Druella jerked so hard she almost launched her teacup across the room. Bellatrix was already on her feet. She grabbed the spoon and turned it over, checking every angle, tapping it with her nail to hear it ring. Then she looked at Regulus. Her expression had changed. No mockery. No teasing. Just shock, sharp and real. How did you do that? Regulus chewed slowly. Swallowed. Answered around the crumbs. They wanted to turn back. What? The cutlery wanted to look like cutlery again. He shrugged. I just helped. Stupid explanation. Childish to the point of being ridiculous. Which was exactly why it worked. He kept his face calm. Of course he knew what he'd done. Of course he could explain the actual theory. But he couldn't. Not at 3 years old. Wizards pulled off crazy stuff on instinct all the time. But a toddler doing impossible magic and explaining how? That wasn't the kind of genius people admired. That was the kind they got nervous about. Narcissa leaned toward Andromeda. He made it look easy. Andromeda nodded, but her eyes lingered on Regulus. Not just impressed, there was something worried in there too. Walburga's face cycled through shock, confusion and then fierce hungry pride, all in about 2 seconds. She shoved it down. The lady of the House of Black did not lose composure in front of guests. She lifted her teacup, took a careful sip, and said in her steadiest voice, Regulus has a natural gift for transfiguration. Gift? Druella laughed, a little too high. Walburga, that's a miracle. He's 3. What was Orion doing at 3? Smearing jam on the house elf. People kept glancing at Regulus after that. Couldn't help themselves. Regulus just sat there eating his biscuit like nothing happened. Sirius didn't look up once. Regulus glanced at him and understood immediately. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was pride, bruised and bleeding. The party ended eventually. Druella collected her daughters and left. The parlor emptied out until it was just the 4 of them. Walburga lasted about 3 seconds. She scooped Regulus up and crushed him in a hug. My genius. Her voice went feverish against his ear. I knew it. I knew it. The future of the House of Black. Over her shoulder, Regulus could see Sirius standing in the doorway. No 4-year-old should look like that. Shocked and hurt and confused and, yet, jealous. This is going to be a problem. Because a 4-year-old didn't understand strategy. All Sirius knew was that his baby brother just stole the spotlight. Sirius turned and ran. Footsteps pounding up the stairs. Walburga set Regulus down and frowned at the hallway. He's sulking again. Ignore him. You did the right thing, Regulus. He's 4, Regulus thought. But he didn't say it. He was 3 himself. Nobody was going to take life advice from him. That night, Orion knocked on his door. He'd just gotten home. Wisengamot sessions ran late. He sat across from Regulus, his presence heavy even when he kept his voice soft. I heard what happened today. Pause. Your skill is remarkable. Regulus watched him. Waited. How did you do it? Regulus took a few seconds, then gave an answer that sounded small enough to be safe. I don't know. I just saw how. Saw. Orion frowned. Not the answer he expected. I saw what they were supposed to be, Regulus said. So I made them go back. Orion studied him for a long moment. Talent could explain a lot. Rare, sure, but not impossible. Sirius's magic was powerful and messy. Too tied up in emotion. Regulus leaned toward control. Precision. Interesting, Orion said finally. But remember this. Don't show too much in front of others. Genius attracts envy. He paused. It also attracts fear. Regulus tilted his head. Bella looked excited. Orion's jaw tightened. Bellatrix is infatuated with power. So is that man who's been rising lately. Be careful you don't end up on anyone's list. Regulus nodded. He knew exactly who Orion meant. Tom Riddle. The man who'd become Voldemort. Chapter 4, Voldemort is closing in. Spring, 1965. In the garden behind 12 Grimmauld Place the beech tree was just beginning to wake, tender green buds pushing through the bark. Regulus. Sirius came tearing out of the house, a toy sword flailing wildly in his hand. Look. I can make it glow. He screwed his eyes shut in fierce concentration. A faint silver light flickered at the tip of the blade, held for 2 whole seconds, then fizzled out. He was 5 now. Better control than last year. Still wildly unstable. Not bad. Regulus closed his book and offered a serious, dutiful nod. Sirius plunged the sword into the dirt like he'd conquered foreign territory. Let's go explore the basement. Kreaker says there's a box down there that bites. I'm reading. Regulus shook his head. What's so great about books? Sirius leaned in and peeked at the illustration guide. They're all fake. Real dragons are way bigger than this. Bella said that important guy keeps a fire dragon as a pet. Regulus looked up. Which important guy? That one, Sirius whispered, dropping his voice like he was sharing a secret. Bella says he's gathering followers, trying to bring back pure blood glory. Dad says he's dangerous. Regulus's heart skipped. Voldemort. Tom Riddle. Already? He ran through the timeline in his head. In the original history, Voldemort's first rise peaked in the early 1970s, but recruitment and groundwork would have started long before that. He must already be moving in the shadows, waving the banner of pure blood revival to lure old families to his side. What else did Bella say? Regulus asked. She said he's really powerful. That he can make miracles happen. Sirius plopped down on a stone bench. Regulus, what are you thinking about? Sirius poked his shoulder when he didn't respond. I'm thinking. Regulus glanced at the book in his hands. Knowledge is power. That important guy must have read a lot of books. That's not it at all. Sirius shot back. He's just born powerful. Naive, Regulus thought. Power always has a source. Voldemort's talent, his Horcrux research, his mastery of dark magic. None of it came from nowhere. It was taken from books, from experiments, from plunder. A sudden sense of urgency washed over him. There wasn't much time. Once Voldemort rose in earnest, every pure-blood family would be dragged into it. The Blacks, one of the Sacred 28, would have to choose a side. In the original timeline, most of the family joined the Death Eaters, except for Sirius and Andromeda. And he, Regulus Black, would inevitably catch Voldemort's attention, especially if he showed unusual talent. And he couldn't not show it. Preparation had to start now. That afternoon, Regulus hugged 3 finished children's picture books to his chest and knocked on the door of Orion's study. Come in. Orion sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing Wisengamot documents. He looked up, surprised. Regulus? What is it? Father. Regulus set the picture books on the corner of the desk. I've finished these. I want to read real books. Orion set down his quill. Real books. Books with words. With knowledge. With magic. Walburga stepped in just then with tea. She froze mid-step. He's only 4. Orion, don't indulge him. He should start with the code of pure-blood family etiquette. He needs to learn how to uphold the family's honor. Honor needs power behind it. Regulus's voice was soft, but unyielding. If I'm not strong enough, how can I protect the Black family's standing? Walburga stared at him. Hearing that from a 4-year-old was unsettling, almost eerie. Orion nodded. He agreed. Starting tomorrow, you can spend 1 hour a day in the library. Kreaker will accompany you. Yes, father. Regulus turned and left the study. He didn't show excitement or joy. This was only proper. There was no reason a child eager to learn should be refused. Walburga opened her mouth to object, but Orion lifted a hand. Walburga, our son needs a different education. The times are changing. That man is gathering power. The Black family needs more than an heir who only understands etiquette. You mean that man? The entire wizarding world knows, Orion said heavily. He recruits with power, tempts followers, crushes enemies with fear. The Lestranges have already aligned with him. The Malfoys are watching. The Blacks will have to choose sooner or later. The next morning at exactly 10, Kreaker led Regulus to a set of double wooden doors at the far end of the 3rd floor. The doors were black oak inlaid with silver constellations. There were no handles, only 2 symmetrical keyholes shaped like open raven beaks. 2 keys must be turned at the same time, young master, Kreaker said, producing them from his apron. One was silver-white, its handle carved with a sun. The other was pitch black, carved with a moon. They turned together. Click. The doors slid inward without a sound. The first thing Regulus felt upon entering the library was pressure. The density of magic was overwhelming. Silver motes of light hung visibly in the air. Bookshelves stretched from floor to a ceiling 10 meters high. Even magic wouldn't reach the top. You needed a moving ladder. Each shelf was carved with different magical creatures. Goblins and fairies at the bottom. Centaurs and merfolk in the middle. Griffins and fire dragons at the top. At the center of the room stood a massive orrery, a complex brass mechanism modeling the solar system, with several additional celestial bodies only wizards knew existed. The open collection is on the left, young master, Kriaker whispered, as if afraid of waking something. The family inheritance section is on the right and requires permission. Straight ahead is the restricted section. Please do not approach it. Regulus went left. He pulled out a volume on pure-blood family lineages and scanned it. Malfoy, Lestrange, Nott, Caro. The future backbone of the Death Eaters. Once those families threw their full weight behind Voldemort, half of Britain's magical power and resources would fall into his hands. And they would throw their weight behind him. He needed power before that happened. An hour later, Regulus drifted toward the family inheritance shelves. The bookcases here were deep red mahogany, each volume sealed in its own magical barrier. Kriaker hovered nervously. Young master, this area requires permission. I'm just looking at the titles. Then Regulus lifted his gaze. Straight ahead lay the restricted section. There were no shelves. Just a solid wall of black iron set into a stone archway. At its center stood a barred gate, the iron rods as thick as an infant's arm. Beyond it stretched deep darkness. The lock was a bronze skull. Its jaw could move. The keyhole sat in the skull's left eye socket. Regulus narrowed his eyes, peering through the bars. In the depths, shadowy shelves were barely visible. Guild titles glimmered faintly in the dark. Darkest Arts, the origins and advanced study of the unforgivable curses. Blood curse research, bloodline magic and eternal binding. Necromantic communion, forbidden rituals of speaking with the beyond. Each title struck him like a hammer. Voldemort had read these. More than these. Horcruxes. Dark magic. Soul experiments. How much had he already mastered? I have to know. At least enough to understand what he's using. But not now. The timing was wrong. The authority wasn't his yet. Regulus turned to Kriaker. Time's up. Let's go. Before leaving, he cast one last look at the restricted section. Back in his room, Regulus went to the window and stared out at the street below. London at night was a moving ribbon of muggle cars, headlights, and tail lights weaving red and yellow through the dark. The city's glow stained the sky so thoroughly the real stars couldn't be seen. But he knew they were there anyway. Voldemort's war. The power games of the magical world. Pure blood pride and madness, families clawing for glory like it meant something permanent. On a cosmic scale, it was all dust. And right now, Regulus was trapped in it. He watched the street and pictured a man somewhere out there, maybe in an Albanian forest, maybe in the ruins of something ancient, bent over dark magic with a scholar's patience and a monster's appetite. Tom Riddle. The future Voldemort. Time was running out. Chapter 5, I'll send you 1,000 miles away. Spring, 1966. Regulus turned 5. In the House of Black, 5 marked the beginning of formal education. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 in the afternoon, Walburga held family glory lessons in the small study. A massive black family tapestry covered one entire wall, hanging from ceiling to floor. Gold and silver thread traced 1,000 years of marriages across dark fabric, an intricate web of alliances. Monday was genealogy. Here, Walburga said, tapping the top of the tapestry with a slender ebony pointer. He was a 12th century healer. The acknowledged founder of our house. Regulus sat straight-backed on a hard wooden chair, hands resting neatly on his knees, eyes following the pointer's movement. Regulus, Walburga said sharply. Repeat what I just said. From 1578 to 1623, the Black family intermarried with the Rosier family 4 times and the Folly family 3 times, Regulus replied smoothly. Interspersed with alliances to the Crouch and Traverse families, forming a stable structure. Walburga nodded in satisfaction, then turned to Sirius. And you? Sirius squirmed in his chair. Who can remember all that? They're all dead people. They are your ancestors. Dead is dead, Sirius muttered. Walburga's face darkened, anger rising, but Regulus spoke before she could explode. Mother, I have a question. Speak. Why is it that after the 14th century, we only married within the pure-blood families? Regulus pointed to an earlier section of the tapestry. Here, from the 12th to the 14th centuries, the Blacks married into the Pruitt, Macmillan, and even the Bones families. Then it stops. Walburga stiffened. Because those families fell. How did they fall? They began accepting Muggle-borns. Some even married Muggles, Walburga said, her voice turning sharp. Their blood was polluted. The Blacks must remain pure. That is our responsibility. But the Pruitts are still on the list of recognized families, Regulus said calmly. That list is a compromise. Walburga snapped, striking the tapestry with her pointer. A few portraits flinched. A foolish ministry invention. True pure-blood families are fewer and fewer. We are the last beacon in a tainted world. Narrow-minded, Regulus thought, but understandable. In a world where magic was hereditary, blood did matter. But reducing everything to blood alone was far too simple. He glanced at Sirius and knew his brother would never accept this line of thinking. That was probably for the best. A sudden thought surfaced. Maybe Sirius leaving the House of Black would be better for him. The idea startled Regulus, but the logic held. The Blacks would eventually align with Voldemort. Everyone except Sirius and Andromeda. If Sirius was destined to rebel, leaving early and joining the other side sooner might give him a better chance of surviving the war to come. As for Regulus Black, this identity was bound for darkness. He needed the Black family's resources. He needed a pure-blood name. He needed proximity to the Death Eater's inner circle to learn what they knew. He and Sirius were walking two paths that would inevitably oppose each other. Wednesday's lesson was blood supremacy. Muggles are incomplete beings, Walburga said, pacing the study, a sign she was worked up. They have no magic. Like birds without wings. Fish without gills. Failures of evolution. Sirius raised his hand. Regulus had taught him that much. Raise your hand when you want to argue, so it doesn't sound like defiance. Yes. But Muggles build airplanes, Sirius said. Planes can fly. They don't need wings. Walburga gave a cold laugh. Crude imitations. Metal and fuel, loud and polluting. Wizarding brooms are elegant, quiet, clean. But planes can fly higher, faster, and carry more people, Regulus added calmly. Silence fell. Walburga stared at her younger son. Are you defending Muggles? I'm stating facts, Regulus said. Mother, if we're truly superior, we should surpass them in every way. If the only comfort we have is that magic looks more elegant, while they outpace us in speed, capacity, and altitude, then who is actually superior? Sirius sucked in a breath, bracing for the explosion. It didn't come. Walburga stood there, lips moving, no words forming. Maybe the issue isn't superiority, Regulus continued, but what we choose to develop. Muggles advance technology. We advance magic. But if we cling only to tradition while their technology keeps improving, one day the gap will be impossible to ignore. The Ministry has the Statute of Secrecy, Walburga said, her voice weaker now. The statute depends on Muggles being unable to discover us, Regulus replied. What if one day their technology can detect magic? What if they invent machines that can see through a disillusionment charm? What if, while we argue about blood purity, they figure out how to break Muggle-repelling charms? Walburga was quiet for a long time. Enough for today, she said at last, and left in a hurry. Sirius leaned close and whispered, You scared her. Maybe, Regulus said, hopping down from the chair. But someone has to tell the truth. Why are you helping Muggles? Sirius asked, curious. I'm not, Regulus said, looking at him. I just hate lies. If we're really strong, we don't need to prove it by putting others down. Sirius nodded, not fully understanding, but thinking about it. At dinner, Walburga brought up the latest gossip. The Knott family's daughter wants to marry a Mudblood, she said sharply. Mr. Knott locked her in the tower in a rage. They say she'll be sent to a convent in France and kept there for life. Sirius stopped cutting his steak. Why? He asked. She likes him, doesn't she? Likes him. Walburga scoffed. What does liking someone get you? Can it feed you? Can it keep bloodlines pure? She's been led astray. But if two people like each other... Enough. Walburga's voice rose. Sirius, how many times have I warned you? Don't let that filthy muggle way of thinking rot your mind. A Black has responsibilities. Responsibilities mean imprisoning your own daughter. Sirius shot to his feet, chair scraping loudly. Responsibilities mean tearing apart people who love each other. She doesn't love him. She's just... How do you know? Sirius shouted back. You're not her. You don't even know him. Orion set down his utensils. Sirius. Sit down. I won't. Sirius's eyes were red. This isn't fair. Why can't we choose who we like? Why do we have to marry someone from some list? I don't even know those people. What if I don't like any of them? Walburga stood as well, her wand sliding into her hand. Say that again. Regulus watched the scene unfold, exhausted. Sirius's rebellion was on full display. He didn't even truly understand what love was yet, but he instinctively opposed this kind of cruelty. Their mother, meanwhile, only knew how to press harder, forcing her pure-blood ideals onto him. Mother, Regulus said calmly. What Sirius means is that affection matters when choosing a partner. But from the perspective of family continuity, blood stability is also important. Maybe the two can be balanced. For example, choosing someone you like within the acceptable families. Walburga paused, her anger easing slightly. Well, of course. Within appropriate limits, feelings are preferable. Sirius stared at Regulus, hurt in his eyes. So you're on their side too? You think blood matters more than liking someone? I'm talking about reality, Regulus said, meeting his gaze. The reality is that the House of Black won't accept Muggleborns. Anyone who resists will be disowned. You have to choose. Follow the rules, or leave. Sirius understood. He looked at Regulus, then at their parents, and suddenly laughed. He turned and walked out of the dining room. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just quiet footsteps fading away. Orion said nothing. He only looked at Regulus, his expression complicated. Dinner continued in silence. Chapter 6, Flesh and Soul. Summer, 1967. Regulus turned 6. In the House of Black, 6 meant you were entitled to your own study space. And so, the top-floor attic at 12 Grimmauld Place welcomed a new occupant. Regulus had questions he couldn't let go of. Wizarding medicine could heal injuries with ease, yet the human body remained fragile. Why? If magic could repair flesh, could it also strengthen it? And if so, why had no one spent centuries studying this in any serious way? He sat cross-legged on a cushion, eyes closed, turning his awareness inward. Magic flowed through him along fixed, familiar routes, like channels carved long ago. The books all said the same thing. Magic was born from the soul and released through the body. That was it. No one bothered to ask how the body itself shaped the process. It was like knowing water came out of a pipe, but never wondering whether a wider, smoother pipe might let the water flow faster and steadier. In the original story, this had been a blind spot of the author. Living inside it, Regulus realized it was a blind spot of wizarding civilization as a whole. He moved beneath the skylight. Slanted sunlight poured in, cutting bright shapes across the floor. He held out his hand, letting the light rest on his palm, then closed his eyes again. This time, he tried something different. Without casting a spell, without words or wand, he guided his magic toward his right arm. Simply asked it to go there. At first, it resisted. Magic felt almost willful, slipping back into its usual paths, refusing deliberate redirection. Regulus didn't rush it. Patience was something an adult soul had in abundance. He imagined magic as water, his intent as a riverbed. Slowly digging. Slowly guiding. 2.5 hours later, it worked. His right arm felt warm. Not heat exactly, but fullness. Energy gathering beneath the skin. He clenched his fist. His grip felt, just a little stronger. Over the next few days, Regulus shifted into pure observer mode. He watched everyone in the house through the lens of perception. Walburga's magic was powerful but unstable. When her emotions spiked, her magic surged and trembled with it. Regulus noticed something else. When she maintained complex protective charms for long stretches, she would unconsciously rub her temples, her face turning pale. Conclusion: the burden of magic expenditure was ultimately carried by the body. Yet it never occurred to her to strengthen the body to increase that tolerance. Orion's magic was deep and heavy, controlled with precision. But once, after his father finished casting and lowered his wand, Regulus caught the faintest tremor in his fingers. Barely noticeable. Still there. A fatigue response from long-term, high-intensity spell work. Magic could suppress it, but it always came back. Sirius, however, was the best comparison of all. One afternoon, Sirius tried out a new charm in the garden. He lifted pebbles into the air and arranged them into a constellation. He managed it, but only just. When it ended, Sirius collapsed onto the grass, panting, sweat soaking his hairline. So tired. He muttered to himself. Regulus walked over and handed him a glass of water. Used up a lot of magic. Sirius gulped it down, then only nodded, offering a quiet, Regulus knew the reason for the silence. After what had been said at dinner last time, Sirius didn't want to talk to him. Regulus didn't push. He turned and left. A week later, deep into the night, Regulus knocked on the door to Orion's study. Come in. Orion was reviewing documents, the candle at the corner of his desk casting light over his exhausted face. The ministry had been under immense pressure lately. From overheard fragments, Regulus suspected it had everything to do with that rising figure. The Death Eater's earliest form had already begun moving, staging attacks. The ministry buried the news, but the old families all knew. Father. Go on. Orion set down his quill and rubbed between his brows. I've been thinking about something, Regulus said, taking the chair opposite him. Where exactly is a wizard's magic stored? Orion paused. That's a foundational question. Magic originates from the soul and is released through the body. But the body isn't just a conduit, is it? Regulus pressed. If the body is injured, magical output suffers. If the body is strengthened, shouldn't output improve? In theory, yes, Orion said. A healthy body supports spellcasting. But once basic health is reached, further physical enhancement provides negligible benefit. Has anyone tested that? Orion was quiet for several seconds. Not that I know of. Traditional thought holds that magical potential is innate. Training improves control, not total capacity. But what if capacity is limited by how much the body can bear? Regulus leaned forward. Like a cup. It only holds so much water. But if we make the cup bigger? The soul is the cup, Orion cut in. Not the body. Are you sure? Orion studied his son for a long moment. No. But that's the accepted theory. Accepted doesn't mean correct, Regulus said softly. He continued, Father, how many things in the wizarding world were once accepted and later proven wrong? For example, it was once accepted that Muggles were inferior, but now they're technology. That's enough. Orion's voice carried a quiet warning. Regulus, I know you're clever. You think differently. But some questions are not yours to ask yet. Then when should I ask them? Regulus didn't retreat. When Voldemort comes knocking. Orion shot to his feet. Who told you that name? His tone hardened. No one, Regulus said calmly. I listened. Cousin Bellatrix. Mrs. Malfoy. You and Mother, speaking in low voices. You call him the Dark Lord, that man. But I found his name. Tom Marvolo Riddle. He calls himself Voldemort. Orion slowly sat back down, fatigue weighing his words. You shouldn't know these things. But I do, Regulus replied. And I know more. He's recruiting. Gathering power. Pure-blood families are choosing sides. The House of Black will have to choose eventually. After a long silence, Orion asked, Are you afraid? No, Regulus answered without hesitation. But I need strength. Orion closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a long time had passed. The question you asked earlier, about the body and magic, he said. I can tell you this. Someone in the Black family studied it. My great-grandfather, Arcturus Black. He believed wizards relied too heavily on magic and neglected the body. Regulus held his breath. Someone had seen it. And it was his own ancestor. He conducted experiments, Orion continued, his voice darkening with memory. Using magic to strengthen the body, then using that enhanced body to contain more magic. The theory was a reinforcing cycle. What happened? Regulus asked, unable to hide his urgency. He lived to 137, Orion said. One of the longest-lived Blacks. And he was powerful. But in his later years, he went mad. His notes are filled with chaotic symbols and warnings. The final entry reads, "The container is too solid. What's inside can't get out. I've trapped myself." Regulus stared, stunned. "You could trap yourself like that? What does it mean?" he asked bluntly. "I don't know." Orion shook his head. "The notes are sealed, buried deep in the restricted section. I tried reading them once. 3 pages in, and my head felt like it was splitting. They weren't meant for ordinary readers." Regulus's heart hammered. Someone had researched it. There were results. And a price. "I want to see them." He knew Orion wouldn't agree. He asked anyway. "No." Orion refused without hesitation. Then he paused. "At least not now." Arcturus's final state was, very wrong. "Promise me, Regulus. Don't seek out those notes on your own." Regulus stayed silent. He didn't want to promise. "Promise me," Orion repeated, his voice heavier now, almost pleading. "I promise." Orion exhaled, knowing that promise might not last long, and waved him away. "Go." Back in the attic, Regulus sat in the dark, turning everything over in his mind. Arcturus Black. 137 years old. Madness. A container too solid. Had the body, strengthened to its extreme, ended up imprisoning the soul instead? But what if soul and body truly fused, with no boundary between them? What then? Chapter 7, A Deepening Rift. Late Autumn, 1968. The beech tree in the courtyard of 12 Grimmauld Place shed its last leaf. Regulus was 7. A year of guided magic circulation had paid off. His strength had increased, his body was noticeably sturdier, his perception of magic sharper, his control more precise. Sirius was 8. And his rebellion had entered a new phase. He was no longer satisfied with talking back. Now, he resisted on purpose. Walburga told him to memorize the family tree, so he deliberately mixed up names. She made him practice etiquette, and he turned teacups into frogs. She demanded formal dress, and he tore his collar. Once, at dinner, Sirius openly questioned pure-blood ideology. Walburga exploded. Regulus stepped in to smooth things over, and from that moment on, Sirius saw him as someone currying favor with their parents. They spoke less and less. Sometimes Regulus would run into Sirius in the corridor and catch the look in his eyes. Anger at betrayal, confusion, and a trace of disappointment. Sirius thought Regulus had chosen the family, and that meant choosing against him. In some ways, he wasn't wrong. The first weekend of December, the Malfoys arrived as scheduled. Everyone knew the real purpose of the visit. Malfoy was here on Voldemort's behalf, to probe where the House of Black stood. Abraxas Malfoy was 55, impeccably maintained, his silver-grey hair bound neatly at the nape of his neck. He wore deep green robes, the cuffs embroidered with intricate silver serpents. An ebony cane rested in his hand, its head set with a dark opal that glimmered green. "Walburga, you look well," he said smoothly. "Orion, it's been some time. How fares your work with the Wizengamot?" Orion sat at the head of the table, his tone even. "Much the same. And you, Mr. Malfoy? Keeping busy?" Abraxas lifted his teacup and blew gently across the surface. "Thinking about the future. The future of the magical world, and our place in it." Lucius wasn't present. Regulus guessed he was preparing for something more important. A formal entry into the Death Eaters, perhaps, or involvement in Voldemort's inner circle. "The Dark Lord holds the Black family in high regard," Abraxas said, cutting to the point. "Among the Sacred 28, your bloodline is the oldest, the purest, and the most steadfast." "Steadfast?" Orion asked. "In preserving tradition." Abraxas set his cup down. "Many families waver now. The Potters openly associate with Muggleborns. The Weasleys are practically a symbol of bloodline betrayal. The Longbottoms are pure blood, yes, but weak. Only the Blacks have remained consistent. The Dark Lord believes such a family deserves its rightful place in the new order." Walburga leaned forward slightly. "Does the Dark Lord have specific plans?" Abraxas's voice rose with enthusiasm. "Restoration. Purging weakness from the Ministry of Magic. Rebuilding the authority of the Wizengamot. Standardizing magical education. Most importantly, establishing pure-blood leadership and returning the magical world to its proper order. Ambitious, Orion said. Visionary, Abraxas corrected. The Dark Lord possesses not only ambition but power, knowledge, and the resolve to reshape reality. He's already gathered like-minded supporters. The Lestranges, Knots, Caros, and all have declared their support. Support what? Sirius's voice cut in. Walburga frowned. Sirius, when adults are speaking. I'm asking honestly. Sirius locked eyes with Abraxas. Support him doing what? Killing people? Persecuting Muggleborns? Turning everyone into his slaves? Sirius. Walburga's voice sharpened. Abraxas raised a hand, stopping her. He looked at Sirius without a hint of anger. It's good for the young to question, he said. The Dark Lord doesn't seek tyranny. He seeks order. In the new order, everyone will have their place. Pure-blood wizards are born to lead the magical world. Half-bloods and Muggleborns can serve. Muggles must be managed. By what right? Sirius jumped to his feet, voice ringing. By what right do you decide who leads and who serves? Abraxas answered as if it were obvious. By strength. By millennia of legacy. By magic's own choice. Pure-blood magic is stronger and more stable, and that is fact. I don't think Sirius started. You thinking doesn't matter, Abraxas interrupted gently. The rules by which the world turns won't change because of an 8-year-old. When you grow up, when you've seen the chaos of the magical world, Muggle fear and persecution of magic, pure-blood families pushed to the margins, perhaps you'll understand. And if I never do? Sirius shot back, defiance burning in his eyes. Then you'll have two options, Abraxas said with a smile. Accept what you don't understand and follow the rules. Or be excluded by them. The threat was naked. Sirius went pale, but he didn't back down. That was when Regulus spoke. Mr. Malfoy is right, he said calmly. Order requires power to uphold it. If pure-blood wizards truly possess stronger magical talent, then having us lead would create a more stable, stronger society. All eyes turned to him. Walburga's eyes lit up. Orion's expression didn't change. Sirius stared at Regulus, shock giving way to disbelief, then settling into something wounded and distant. You really think that? Sirius asked, his voice trembling, as if asking one last time. Regulus met his gaze. I'm stating a fact. If pure-blood magic is stronger, then leadership follows naturally. Sirius opened his mouth to argue again, fury rising, but Walburga stood abruptly. Sirius, go to your room. Now. Sirius looked at his mother, then his father, then his brother, and finally at Abraxas. He turned and left. After he was gone, the room felt looser, the tension easing. Abraxas lifted his teacup again. The magical world's future isn't limited to Britain, Europe, the Americas, and Asia. The Dark Lord's influence is spreading. Families who support him will have the chance to participate in rebuilding magical order on a global scale and will get resources, knowledge, and power. Far beyond what the Ministry can offer. Regulus almost wanted to scoff. Voldemort's ambition truly knew no bounds. Global order, when he couldn't even secure Britain. After a moment, Orion spoke. We need time to consider. Abraxas rose. Of course. The Dark Lord never forces loyalty. There will be a small gathering in Wiltshire next month. A few like-minded families exchanging views. If the Blacks are interested, I can extend an invitation. Walburga looked to her husband, hope in her eyes. Orion nodded. We'll consider it. Once Malfoy was gone, Walburga rounded on Orion immediately. We must attend. Abraxas is right. This is an opportunity. The House of Black should lead in the new era. Walburga, Orion cut in, exhaustion heavy in his voice. We need caution. It all sounds ideal, but what's the cost? Those weak elements he wants to purge may include our friends. Even our family. Andromeda is no longer family, Walburga said coldly. And Sirius. If his rebellion continues. Then let him go. Walburga's voice rose sharply. The House of Black doesn't need a rebellious son. We have Regulus. She turned to her younger child, eyes burning. You spoke well today. Thinking of the greater whole. That's what an heir of the House of Black should be. Regulus lowered his head. He didn't respond. In the attic laboratory, Regulus didn't light a lamp. He sat in the dark, replaying the afternoon. Abraxas's words carried several key truths. Voldemort's influence had already spread beyond Britain, moving toward something global. He tempted pureblood families with visions of future order, with promises of power and resources. And his methods included something called purging, a gentle word for unrestrained violence. No one but Regulus knew how this would end. Voldemort would fall. That outcome was inevitable, yet driven by countless coincidences along the way. Regulus needed strength. Chapter 8, Echoes of the Universe. Spring, 1969. Regulus turned 8. The east-facing room on the third floor of 12 Grimmauld Place officially became his bedroom and study. Orion had given him more space. A full wall of bookshelves. A heavy oak desk. A window that caught the morning sun. But the place Regulus truly wanted to reach lay much deeper in the house. At the end of the kitchen corridor was a storage room that stayed locked year-round. Walburga said it was filled with useless things, relics belonging to family members who had been struck from the tree. They couldn't be destroyed, but they couldn't be displayed either. Among them were the belongings of Alfred Black, sealed away in 1960. Alfred had been disowned a few years earlier. He liked Muggle objects. Collected them and used to show obvious friendliness toward Muggles. Regulus had only ever heard his name in Walburga's curses. After several years of study, Regulus finally broke the protective enchantments on the door. It was nothing like a simple unlocking charm. Inside, there were no magical artifacts at all. Only Muggle items. An old vacuum tube radio. Several issues of National Geographic from 1950. A stack of the Times. And a few hardbound notebooks. It took him 2 days to repair the radio. When the current finally ran through it, the tubes glowed with a warm orange light. Static hissed from the speaker. Regulus turned the tuning knob slowly, until a voice emerged. "This is the BBC, bringing you the news. NASA has announced that the Apollo 10 mission has successfully completed a lunar orbit, making final preparations for a manned landing on the Moon." Regulus sat behind the oak desk, one hand resting on the radio's warm wooden casing, completely still. The Moon. Muggles were about to go to the Moon. Most of the wizarding world didn't know. Or knew and didn't care. To them, the Moon was a silver disk in the night sky. Something to calculate phases for potion brewing. A romantic backdrop. No one thought about going there, because wizards didn't need to. They had magic. But could magic truly do it? Real space travel? He didn't know. What he did know was that Muggles, using nothing but science and engineering, had done something wizards had never even tried. Perhaps something wizards couldn't do. Where was the limit of magic? Muggles were breaking through boundaries wizards treated as impossible. If magic and science were combined, maybe even greater limits could fall. He buried those thoughts deep, but they occupied a crucial place in his mind. July 20, 1969. Late at night. Regulus wasn't asleep. He sat by the window, the old vacuum tube radio in his hands. Static crackled through the broadcast, but every word was clear. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." A brief silence followed, then an explosion of cheers. Regulus tightened his grip on the radio. "Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. You're cleared to prepare for EVA." A long wait followed. Instrument sounds, commands and fragments of conversation. "I'm at the foot of the ladder now. The LM footpads have only penetrated the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained, almost like powder. I'm going to step off the ladder now." Another, longer pause. Regulus stood, walked to the window, and pushed it open. Warm summer air rushed in, carrying London's familiar scent of coal smoke and brick. He looked up. The moon hung overhead, nearly full, its silver light cold and constant. The voice came again, clearer now, stronger. "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Regulus stared at the moon. That silver disk. That tool wizards used to time potions. That symbol poets adored. Right now, 2 Muggles were standing on it. Amid everything that felt inevitable, a shock still ran through him. Muggles, with their short lives, fragile bodies and hands without magic, had reached the moon. And wizards, who could reshape reality, cross space, and live for centuries. What were they doing? Fighting for power. Perfecting ways to hurt one another. Arguing over whose blood was purer. Cursing each other for imaginary authority over a small island. And he was standing in the middle of it. The thought made Regulus laugh softly. Since he was here, things had to change. One evening in late August, Regulus found Orion in the study. His father was reviewing documents. The ministry's atmosphere had grown increasingly tense. Death Eater activity was shifting from secret to semi-public. Father, I have a question. Orion set down his quill and rubbed his brow. Go on. How high can a wizard fly? The question was abrupt, almost absurd. Orion paused. That depends on the method. The highest recorded altitude for broom flight is 15,000 feet. Beyond that, the air thins and breathing becomes difficult. Thestrals can fly higher, but there are limits. Why do you ask? Regulus didn't answer. He asked another question. What if someone wanted to fly higher? High enough to leave the atmosphere? Orion stared at him. Why would you want to leave the atmosphere? Just curious, Regulus said evenly. Books mention ancient wizards who tried to fly to the sun or the moon. They all failed. That's mythology, not history, Orion corrected. Muggles have the myth of Icarus too. The lesson is the same. Don't overreach. Wizards have magic, but magic has limits. Outside the atmosphere, there's no air, no pressure, extreme temperatures, unknown energies. A bubblehead charm lasts only a few hours. Shielding charms don't block certain kinds of radiation. Apparition has distance limits and requires familiarity with the destination. He paused, studying Regulus. What are you really thinking about? You know about radiation? Even vacuum conditions? Regulus thought. He decided to be honest. His father was someone he could talk to. I'm thinking that Muggles landed on the moon this year, Regulus said. They don't have magic, but they did it. Orion was silent for a long time. Candlelight crackled in the study. I know, he said at last. The Daily Prophet mentioned it. A small notice in an unimportant corner. The editors thought it was a Muggle trick, not worth attention. But it's the moon, Regulus insisted. To wizards, the moon is just the moon. Orion stood and went to the window, his back to his son. It affects werewolves, potions, tides. But it isn't a place. No one wants to go there. Why? That was what Regulus couldn't understand. It was right there. Why did no one want it? Orion turned, his expression complicated. Because wizards see only magic. Magic is on Earth, in life, in the soul. The stars are too far. Too cold. Too unfamiliar. They aren't our domain. Domains can expand. Maybe. Orion returned to the desk. But at what cost? What would wizards have to give up to explore the stars? What risks would they take? And more importantly, who would support it? He looked at Regulus. Say what you actually think. Don't hide one question behind another. Regulus took a deep breath. I'm thinking that if wizards put the energy they spend on power struggles, on dark magic research, on obsessing over pure blood glory into something else, into exploring the universe, how far could we go? Orion didn't answer right away. He sat, fingers interlaced. Very far, he said after a long pause. But only if wizarding society solves its own problems first. Voldemort is tearing things apart. The ministry is weak and evasive. Tensions between purebloods and half-bloods are escalating. In times like these, no one looks at the stars. But maybe the stars are the way out, Regulus said. If our perspective were far enough that Earth's conflicts look small, maybe we could move past them. Orion laughed softly. Tired. Bitter. Idealism, he said without mercy. I had similar thoughts when I was young. Reality is that people rarely rise above their level. Wizards are trapped on Earth. Trapped in flesh and blood. Trapped in social structures. Then his tone hardened. And remember this. Ideas like that are heresy in today's wizarding world. Pureblood families will say you're seduced by Muggle technology. Radicals will say you're weak. Voldemort will say you're distracted. Until you're strong enough, keep it hidden. Chapter 9, A Small Boy in a Shattered Home. August 31, 1971. The dinner table at 12 Grimmauld Place was wrapped in a heavy silence. Tomorrow, Sirius would leave for Hogwarts. Walburga had been preparing for it for a week. Remember, she said for the 10th time, you represent the House of Black. Once you board the train, sit in the Slytherin carriage. Don't mingle with those. I'm not going to Slytherin. Sirius didn't raise his voice. Walburga froze, her knife and fork suspended midair. What did you say? I'm not going to Slytherin, Sirius repeated, eyes fixed on his roasted lamb. I'm going to Gryffindor. The table went dead silent. Even the ancestral portraits on the walls stopped whispering. Phineas Nigella stared out of his frame, eyes wide, mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for water. Orion slowly set down his wineglass. The sorting hat considers a student's wishes, but it also weighs bloodline and traits. For 500 years, the Blacks have been sorted into Slytherin. Then I'll be the one to break it, Sirius said stubbornly. I don't want to spend 7 years with a pit full of snakes. Snakes? Walburga's voice began to shake. That is where your family has belonged for generations. That is glory. It's a cage. Sirius's voice flared. I don't need black glory. I just need to be myself. He turned to Regulus. His 10-year-old brother looked calm, slicing a piece of steak and lifting it to his mouth. And you? Sirius demanded. You'll go to Slytherin, won't you? Be their perfect heir, study hard and perform well. Wait patiently until you inherit this rotten family. Regulus looked up. I'll go where I belong. Where you belong? Sirius laughed. There's only one place a black belongs. The Slytherin dungeons, with a bunch of lunatics obsessed with pure blood glory. Enjoy it, little brother. He turned and walked out of the dining room. Walburga slumped back in her chair, her face drained of color. Orion's expression didn't change, but his magic stirred restlessly. Regulus finished the food on his plate. He knew how this would end. In the original story, Sirius was sorted into Gryffindor, the first Black in history not to enter Slytherin. He also knew that starting tomorrow, many things would change. On the evening of September 1st, an owl arrived with a letter from Hogwarts. Walburga's hands shook as she tore open the envelope. She skimmed the parchment, her face turning from pale to iron grey. Her lips trembled. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. Orion caught her and took the letter. It read, Sirius Black has been sorted into Gryffindor House. That night, 12 Grimmauld Place felt like a house in mourning. But Regulus knew this was only the beginning. From the next day on, Walburga poured all her attention onto him. You must be 10 times better than him, she said over breakfast. No. 100 times better. You must prove the black bloodline hasn't fallen. Prove that the true heir is here. Regulus nodded. He said nothing. This was exactly what he wanted. The price was Sirius's departure, and eventually, his complete break from the family. There was no joy in that, but it was the best arrangement. He was granted new privileges. Unlimited access to the library. Permission to consult parts of the family inheritance section. Even supervised access to some lower-risk experimental notes. With Sirius gone, the house grew quieter. Every day, Regulus spent 4 hours in the library, 2 hours in the attic, and the rest enduring his mother's lessons and his father's occasional examinations. The practice of magic circulation had brought real change over the past 2 years. His magical capacity increased slowly but steadily, like digging a well one scoop at a time. Given enough days, the well grew deeper. It was patient work. Every night before sleep, Regulus practiced. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, eyes closed, breathing slowed, awareness turned inward. He guided magic from his limbs toward his chest, then back out again, setting it into a cycle. Over time, he no longer needed to imagine it. Magic began to flow on its own, following the paths he'd carved. Like a river finding its channel. He could now make several feathers trace perfect circles in the air, each path deviating by less than a millimeter. Or cause the surface of a cup of water to form intricate wave patterns that held for long minutes without breaking. This was synchronization between magic and will. A shift in precision. And finally, recovery. Where intense practice once demanded long rest, circulating magic through his body now sped up natural recovery. Like stretching after exercise to encourage blood flow, magic had its own circulatory system. Dash. From autumn 1971 to spring 1972, his three cousins each began interacting with him more deeply. Bellatrix visited 12 Grimmauld Place more often. At 20, she was already a devoted early follower of Voldemort, a burning fervor in her eyes. "The world is sick, Regulus," she told him one afternoon in the garden. "Muggle filth pollutes magic. Half-bloods dilute ancient power. The Ministry of Magic is run by cowards. We need a cleansing. A cleansing." Regulus watched her slash the air with her hand, as if wielding invisible blades. "To remove impurities." Bellatrix smiled, and the smile sent a chill down his spine. "The Dark Lord will lead us. He has power, vision, resolve. When he takes control, pure-blood families will stand at the top again. We don't need equality. We need true rule." "Rule over whom?" Regulus asked, looking at his cousin, knowing she would descend further into madness until she became a mirror of Voldemort himself. He couldn't stop it. He didn't intend to. "Everyone." Bellatrix's voice rang with exhilaration. "Muggles, half-bloods and mudbloods. They'll all find their place." Narcissa was different. At 16, she was a sixth year at Hogwarts and a Slytherin. "Bella has her path," Narcissa told Regulus privately at a family gathering. "You need your own. Slytherin isn't just fanaticism. We value intelligence too." "Intelligence. Judgment." Narcissa tapped her cake lightly with a silver fork. "Knowing when to advance and when to retreat. Knowing who's useful and who's dangerous. Knowing what to say and what to hide." She offered practical advice. "Always have 3 excuses ready. If you're caught out after curfew, have 3 reasons, tailored to different people. Tell a professor you got lost in the library. Tell them you lost a pet. Tell the truth to friends, but only if they're trustworthy. Never let anyone fully understand you. Not even your closest friend. Keep at least one secret. Secrets are leverage. Secrets are armor. In Slytherin, value matters more than friendship. What can you offer? Knowledge? Resources? Protection? Figure out your worth, then find people who need it." Regulus listened carefully. Narcissa's words were cold, but they were real. And useful. Andromeda visited the least, but she mattered most to him. Of the 3 cousins, she was the kindest. At 17, she was in her 7th year at Hogwarts, famous across the school for being different. She never joined pure-blood cliques. Instead, she debated magical creatures with half-blood and muggle-born students, earning repeated scoldings from Bellatrix for tainting the bloodline. She came to Grimmauld Place less and less. Walburga didn't welcome her. Her thinking was problematic. On a rainy day in March 1972, Andromeda found Regulus in his room. "I'm leaving," she said without preamble. "Where to?" "Leaving Britain." She sat by the window as rain traced long lines down the glass. "I'm marrying Ted. He's Muggle-born. You know what that means?" Regulus nodded. Her name burned from the tapestry. The family would no longer acknowledge her. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "I am," Andromeda said honestly. "Afraid of losing my family. Afraid of being rejected. Afraid of the uncertainty ahead. But I'm more afraid of staying here and slowly becoming someone I don't recognize." She looked at Regulus. "I know you're not like Sirius. You're smart. Rational. You know how to compromise. Just don't let compromise turn into surrender. Don't let this family swallow you. You have your own heart. Remember it." Regulus was silent for a long time. "Thank you," he said at last. "Take care." Andromeda stood and paused at the door. "And, if one day you need help, real help, you can find me. I'll be in France." Another Black was leaving. Chapter 10, Growth and Expectations. July, 1972. Sirius Black finished his first year at Hogwarts and returned to 12 Grimmauld Place. He had changed a lot. He'd grown his hair long and started wearing Muggle jeans and t-shirts he'd picked up from James Potter. There was nothing left of the image a proper pure-blood wizard was supposed to have. "James thinks Quidditch should allow a few harmless prank charms," Sirius said casually over dinner. "It'd make the game more fun." Walburga set down her knife and fork. "James? That child from the Potter family? If I recall, their bloodline is still passable, but their taste. Is excellent, Sirius cut in. At least they speak like actual people, instead of going on about glory, bloodlines, and duty all day. The air at the table froze. Regulus quietly cut into the roast fish on his plate, watching Sirius out of the corner of his eye. There was something bright in his brother's eyes. A light that had never existed at 12 Grimmauld Place. Freedom, perhaps. Regulus knew it then. Sirius was already halfway out the door. And there's Remus, Sirius went on, as if he hadn't noticed his mother's expression. He's basically a walking library. Knows bits of magical history the professors never bother to teach. Peter's a bit timid, but he's a good guy. That's enough, Walburga snapped, her voice icy. I have no interest in your friend's trivialities. Where is your Hogwarts report card? Upstairs. Passed everything. Outstanding in flying. Defense against the dark arts was good. Sirius shrugged, completely unfazed. That's enough. Enough. Walburga stood, anger flashing across her face. The heir of the House of Black should excel in every subject. Should be a prefect. Should. I'm not the heir. Sirius rose to his feet as well, meeting her head on. Regulus is. You chose him years ago, didn't you? He looked at his brother. Regulus met his gaze and said nothing. Look at him, Sirius said, pointing at Regulus. Sitting straight, cutting fish like he's brewing a potion. He's already ready to be the kind of black you want. So let me go. All right. He turned and left the dining room. Walburga moved as if to follow, but Orion caught her hand. Let him go, Orion said quietly. Some words can't be taken back once they're spoken. He'd seen this day coming years ago. Regulus had played no small part in it, and Orion had never tried to stop it. Regulus finished his dinner and went upstairs. At the turn of the staircase, he found Sirius leaning against the wall, hands in the pockets of his jeans, staring out at the dim street beyond the window. Do you think I went too far? Sirius asked without turning. I think you're happy, Regulus said softly, shaking his head. Sirius paused, then turned to look at him. At Hogwarts, I am happy, he admitted. The Gryffindor Tower is always loud. Someone's always doing something stupid. Someone's always laughing. It's not like this place. He glanced around the dark corridor. It's like a beautiful tomb. Tombs can hold treasures, Regulus said, a subtle warning beneath the words. If you know how to look. Every tragedy began with a lack of power. Sirius had never thought about seeking power at all, right up until his death. I don't want a tomb's treasure, Sirius said, shaking his head. I want a life in the sunlight, even if it's short. He looked at Regulus. You know what's really ridiculous? James's parents. The Potters. They're pure blood too, but they don't obsess over it. They care whether James is happy. Whether he's made friends. Whether he's learning things he actually enjoys. Not whether he can uphold family honor. Regulus fell silent. He knew it was true. The Potter family might be pure blood, but they'd always been open-minded and normal. So you have a family now, Regulus said, a hint of emotion slipping through. Sirius's expression softened. Yet. I do. Then his face hardened again. But you wouldn't understand. You already chose this place. He walked back to his room. The door closed softly behind him. Regulus stood alone in the corridor, listening to Walburga's distant complaints to Orion drifting up from downstairs. I understand. I just won't make the same choice. Gryffindor is your home. The Potter family is your home. But how long will that protect you? And when the time comes, will you be able to protect them? When Voldemort truly rises? When war begins? When your Muggle-born friends become targets, you'll fight back. But you won't have the power. You won't be able to protect anyone. Regulus shook his head, pushed the thoughts away, and returned to his room. By the end of July, Orion set up a simple dueling field in the back garden to test Regulus's practical ability. Hogwarts isn't just a school, he said. There's competition. Conflict. Struggles beneath the surface. You need to know how to protect yourself. Rules, non-lethal spells only. Begin. Orion showed no mercy simply because his opponent was 11 years old. He raised his wand, and the first silent disarming spell shot out fast and precise, aimed straight for Regulus's wrist. Regulus didn't dodge. He didn't draw his wand. He lifted his left hand and opened his palm. The red spell struck an invisible barrier half a meter away, bursting into silver sparks. A silent, wandless prodigo. Orion's eyebrows rose. He pressed on. Impedimenta. Locomotor mortis. Petrificus totalis. Spells flew in from different angles, the tempo steadily increasing. Regulus still didn't move. He stood where he was, arms relaxed at his sides, only adjusting his fingers now and then. Each spell was intercepted at the last moment. Some deflected. Some dispersed. Some vanished entirely. He never cast a full-body shield. That consumed too much magic and could be shattered under sustained pressure. Instead, he deployed multiple micro-shields, forming them instantly where needed and dissolving them just as fast once their job was done. 30 seconds later, Orion stopped. "You're using intent to control magic directly," he said, astonished. "You've eliminated the casting process entirely." His usually steady voice wavered. Even elite aurors rarely achieved that level of control. And his second son was doing it with ease at 11. "Yes," Regulus said, nodding. "Without incantations or gestures, it's faster and more efficient." "Who taught you?" "I figured it out myself," Regulus replied. In truth, it was a byproduct of his magic guidance circulation. Orion was silent for a long time. He looked at his son with a complicated expression. Surprise. Pride. And a trace of concern. At last, he spoke. "You're exceptional, Regulus. Beyond my expectations." "Thank you." Regulus inclined his head slightly. Orion stepped closer and rested a hand on his shoulder. "You'll accomplish great things. But at Hogwarts, you only need to be an excellent student. Don't stand out unnecessarily. Do you understand?" "I understand," Regulus said. "I'll control how much I show." When the test ended, Orion took him to the deepest level of the family vault, into a far more secret inheritance chamber. Only a few black wood shelves stood inside. Orion took out 3 items. The first was a family ring. Silver, engraved with the Black family crest. It wasn't the true ring of the head of house, but a replica. "No authority as head of house," Orion said, handing it to Regulus. "But it can sense the family's protective wards. If you're wearing it and another member of the Black family is in mortal danger, it will heat up. The hotter it gets, the greater the danger." Regulus accepted the ring and understood what it meant. No authority, but still a symbol of the head of house. And symbols carried obligations. That obligation was serious. The second item was a magic notebook. The cover was made of some kind of black leather, warm to the touch. There was no lock. Only black blood could open it. "Made with ancestral blood and secret rites," Orion said. "Anything written inside encrypts itself. Only the writer can fully read it. To anyone else, it appears as chaotic symbols. If someone tries to force it open, the contents self-destruct." It was tacit permission. Orion knew Regulus would study dangerous things. He didn't stop him. He simply gave him a safer way to record them. The third item was a meteorite amulet. A simple silver pendant, set with a small piece of dark grey stone at its center. The surface bore the patterns of a fusion crust. "One of our ancestors brought it back from the north," Orion said. "They say it came from the sky itself. It's been centuries, and no one's ever figured out what it does. It never gathers dust. It always stays this temperature." Regulus took the amulet. The stone felt smooth and faintly warm, as if something alive flowed within it. "I think it suits you," Orion said. "Because where your eyes are looking, isn't the same place as ours." At last, his father rested a hand on his shoulder. "Hogwarts is a small world," he said. "But remember this. There are worlds beyond it." Chapter 11, A Reckless Confrontation. At 10:47 a.m. on September 1, 1972, Regulus Black came to a stop before the brick wall between platforms 9 and 10 at King's Cross Station. The 11-year-old was tall for his age, dressed in a dark green robe pressed to perfection. A black family crest was pinned neatly at his collar. His hair was a deep, pure black, carrying the Black family's signature slight curl. Grey eyes swept calmly over the crowd. In his left hand was a brand new dragon-hide trunk. Walburga had insisted on the most expensive option. In his right, a cage holding a snowy owl. The owl stood quietly inside, amber eyes observing the surroundings through the bars. Unlike the others nearby, it didn't flap or fuss, only turning its head now and then. Regulus drew a slow breath in. Beyond this wall was another world. A world he'd read about for 10 years, a world he was finally about to enter. He stepped forward. The sensation was like passing through warm mist. Then sound rushed in all at once. A living, chaotic clamor. Owls screeching in a discordant chorus. Cats yowling from baskets. Shrill cries as toads leapt from unfastened pockets. Parents shouting last-minute instructions. Children yelling so loudly their voices cracked with excitement. Platform 9 3/4. The Hogwarts Express lay along the tracks like a massive crimson beast, white steam pouring from its engine and pooling beneath the arched roof in rolling clouds. Students surged toward the doors in waves. Robes of every color blended into a shifting sea. Regulus stayed where he was, gaze sweeping calmly across the platform. He spotted the Potter family. Charles and Euphemia Potter stood not far off, wearing the gentle smiles of ordinary parents seeing their child off to school. 4 people clustered around them. James Potter stood at the front, brown hair as if it had just lost a fight with a hurricane, glasses crooked on his nose. He was flailing his arms, demonstrating something exaggerated to a thin boy carrying a battered suitcase. That was Remus Lupin. Peter Pettigrew hovered half a step behind James, short and round-faced, eyes darting nervously in every direction. Sirius Black lounged against a stack of luggage. At 13, he'd grown another inch since the previous summer, his shoulders starting to take on a young man's shape. He wore the Muggle jeans Walburga despised, faded from wear, frayed at the knees, paired with a plain dark shirt. Over it all was a Gryffindor robe, thrown on carelessly. The robe had clearly been altered. The silver trim at the collar had been dyed red and gold, and faint traces of an embroidered lion lingered at the cuffs. James said something, and Sirius tipped his head back and laughed. It was an easy laugh, loose and unguarded, rising straight from his chest. One arm draped over Remus's shoulder, the other gesturing animatedly. Then his eyes swept the platform and landed on Regulus. The laughter faded naturally. He didn't look away. He didn't nod or signal either. He simply watched, 20 feet apart, separated by the noise and the crowd. Then James noticed too. "Hey!" James shouted, his voice cutting cleanly through the din. "Look who it is!" A little black snake slithering in early to get used to the place. Heads turned. Students and parents alike looked over. Sirius rested a hand on James's shoulder. It was light, but James immediately shut his mouth. Sirius said nothing, only shook his head, then turned and pulled open a carriage door, climbing aboard first. James followed. Remus and Peter trailed after him. Just before boarding, James glanced back at Regulus once more, curiosity and hostility mingling in his eyes. Regulus lifted his trunk and headed toward the middle of the train. James Potter wasn't worth his attention. Inside, the Hogwarts Express was more spacious than it appeared from the outside, a textbook application of the extension charm. A deep red carpet lined the corridor. Sliding doors stood on either side, most already closed, voices and laughter leaking through the seams. Regulus moved quietly along the aisle. At the third carriage, a door stood open. He caught a glimpse inside. James had already shed his robe and was trying to stick a chocolate frog card to the ceiling. Peter was hunched over his luggage. Remus sat by the window with a worn copy of A History of Magic in his hands. Sirius sat across from him, boots propped on an empty seat, idly flicking a golden snitch model he'd acquired from somewhere. Sirius looked up. His gaze met Regulus's through the open door. Then he looked down again and kept playing with the snitch, as if nothing had happened. Regulus walked on. Several carriages later, most were full. Near the 7th, he spotted 2 familiar figures. A red-haired girl with green eyes and faint freckles. She wore a simple black robe, clean and well kept, with a plain silver pin at her collar. Lily Evans, a second year. Beside her stood a black-haired boy with greasy hair and sallow skin. His robe was clearly second-hand and hastily altered, the cuffs worn thin. Severus Snape, also a second year. They were speaking in low voices. Snape leaned forward as he talked, words tumbling out quickly, fingers tracing shapes in the air. Lily listened intently, nodding now and then. As Regulus passed, Snape glanced up. He noticed the trunk in Regulus's hand. The owl cage. The finely tailored, expensive dark green traveling robe. His lips pressed together slightly. Something sharp flickered through his eyes, a mix of hostility and wariness. Then he looked away and continued talking to Lily. Regulus reached the 9th carriage. It was empty. He stowed his trunk on the rack, slid the owl cage beneath the seat across from him, and sat down. From inside his robe, he took out a notebook. He flipped to the most recent page. The relationship between ancient runic variants and magic flow efficiency. Below it sprawled dense symbols, formulas, and diagrams. Some were standard ancient runes. Most were his own refined variants. He dipped his quill and began recording the thoughts he'd had the night before. The train pulled away from London's outskirts. Dense buildings gave way to scattered farmhouses, then wide, rolling fields. The sky hung low and grey, heavy with the promise of rain. The compartment door was suddenly yanked open and slammed against the wall with a dull thud. Regulus looked up only after finishing a complex curve. He didn't need to see who it was. He'd sensed it before they even reached the door. Well, look who it is. James Potter's voice rang with theatrical exaggeration. Little Lord Black, sitting here alone, studying dark magic. Regulus didn't react. He simply watched the performance. To him, even as a second year, James Potter was no different from a child. James stepped inside. Remus and Peter followed. Remus looked uneasy. Peter clutched the doorframe, tense, as if ready to bolt. I'm talking to you. James leaned down in front of Regulus, glaring. I hear you push Sirius around at home. Play the good kid and steal all the attention, is that it? James, Remus said quietly. Don't what? James straightened, his hand already slipping toward the inner pocket of his robe. Regulus found it faintly amusing. He had no idea how Sirius had described him to his friends, for James to believe he'd been bullied. James. Sirius's voice came from the corridor. He appeared in the doorway, breathing slightly hard. He looked at James. I told you not to come. I'm just looking. James shot back. It's not like he bites. At that moment, 2 more figures hurried over. Lily Evans and Severus Snape. Snape took in the scene with a single glance, a curl of mockery tugging at his mouth. Lively as ever. Potter picking on first years again. James spun around. What's it to you, Snivellus? Then he noticed Lily behind him, his tone turning sharper. And you? Always sticking your nose in, Evans. Snape's face darkened instantly. His hand went for his wand. Lily grabbed his arm. Severus, don't. James was faster. Expelliarmus. A red bolt shot toward Snape. The compartment was narrow. They stood less than 10 feet apart. The spell reached Snape almost instantly. A wand slid into Regulus's left hand as if it had always belonged there. He gave the slightest flick of his wrist. No force. No drama. The spell stopped. Frozen in midair. The red light took shape, the disarming charm now a glowing ribbon, one end tethered to the tip of James's wand, the other hanging half a foot from Snape's chest, utterly still. The entire carriage fell silent. Chapter 12, Evans and Snape. James's eyes went wide, his mouth falling open. Remus sucked in a sharp breath. Peter let out a short, startled squeak before clapping a hand over his mouth. Sirius stood in the doorway, his body tense, fingers curling unconsciously into a fist. He wanted to draw his wand, but forced the impulse down. Helping outsiders gang up on his own brother, no matter the outcome, would be humiliating. Besides, he knew the truth. Even if he stepped in, he wouldn't win. Pushing things further would only make it worse. Severus Snape stared at the frozen red ribbon of light. Slowly, he turned his head and looked at Regulus. Lily was still gripping Snape's sleeve, though she no longer seemed aware of it. She was simply staring, stunned. Regulus finally looked up. He glanced at James, his gaze as indifferent as if he were looking at a piece of furniture. Then he turned his attention to the red ribbon. His right hand still held the quill. His left hand lightly gripped the wand, giving it the smallest lift. The red glow dulled. From vivid to faint. From solid to translucent. Then it broke apart, like ice melting, dissolving into countless tiny red motes. They drifted, spun once in the air, and vanished without a sound. The process wasn't fast, and it wasn't slow. Everyone saw it clearly. The wand disappeared from Regulus's hand as abruptly as it had appeared. His left hand returned to the desk. He lowered his head and continued writing, the quill scratching steadily across the page. As if nothing at all had happened. The silence dragged on for at least 10 seconds. James Potter still had his wand raised, his posture stiff, like a statue. His eyes were stretched wide. Behind his lenses, his pupils reflected empty air. 10 seconds ago, a complete disarming charm had been halted, dismantled, and erased, as if it had never existed. You. James's voice caught. He swallowed, his throat bobbing. What did you do? Regulus didn't answer. He didn't even spare James another glance. James clenched his fist, clearly wrestling with himself. He was furious at being ignored, but in the end, he didn't explode. Because he knew. Or rather, he'd learned enough to know. There was a brief note in the appendix of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. In theory, a sufficiently powerful wizard could interfere directly with another's magic and collapse the structure of an inferior spell. The more you knew, the more terrifying that idea became. James Potter loved pranks. He was arrogant. He was biased against Slytherin. But he wasn't stupid. His father had taught him basic spell theory. He'd seen adult wizards cast advanced magic. He read books. So he understood that what had just happened wasn't a first year pulling off a clever trick. It was something far beyond his imagination, unfolding right in front of him. And the one who had done it sat there quietly, as if he were no more important than a passing insect. James's grip tightened around his wand, the wood digging into his palm. He wanted to throw out a taunt, anything to save face, but his mouth was dry. Not a single word came out. What was that spell? Remus asked softly, shifting to place himself in front of James. It wasn't a spell, Sirius said. He stepped into the compartment and stood beside James, his eyes on Regulus. He hadn't expected Regulus to have reached this level already. He knew what it implied, and the realization left him tangled in thoughts he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was some family secret he didn't know about. What do you mean? James snapped, turning on him. I mean you can't beat him, Sirius said, keeping his voice deliberately even. Caught between his friend and his brother, he refused to take sides openly. Then he added, at least not right now. So don't provoke him. James opened his mouth, ready to argue. Then he looked at Regulus, then at the spot where the spell had vanished. In the end, he said nothing. Regulus finally looked up at Sirius. He gave a slight nod, then lowered his gaze again. They left. Out in the corridor, Lily Evans and Severus Snape were still standing there. Lily had let go of Snape's sleeve, but she hadn't moved away. Her eyes were wide as she glanced between Regulus and the place where the spell had disappeared. Snape's expression was darker than usual. He stared at Regulus, his eyes full of wariness. Are you all right? Lily asked first. Regulus looked up, his gaze passing over both of them. Thank you for coming, he said. Strictly speaking, though, it's Mr. Snape who deserves thanks. The spell was aimed at him. Lily blinked, clearly not expecting that. Still, it was true. Oh. I mean, it's nothing. Snape's mouth twitched. He kept staring. How did you do that? Regulus didn't answer. Instead, he stood and introduced himself. Before that, perhaps we should know each other properly. I'm Regulus Black. Black. Lily's eyes widened slightly. You're Sirius Black's brother. Regulus gave a small nod, his right shoulder and hand angling outward just a bit. I'm Lily Evans. Having that confirmed made the name hit differently. She took a quiet breath. Then her tone grew a touch more formal. Second year, Gryffindor. This is Severus Snape, also a second year. Slytherin. Snape pressed his lips into a thin line and nodded stiffly. Regulus inclined his head to both of them. I know your names. Lily blinked. You do. Professor Slughorn mentioned you, Regulus said, as casually as if stating a fact. He said there are 2 second-year students at Hogwarts whose talent in potions far exceeds their peers. Lily Evans and Severus Snape. He suggested that, if I had the chance, I should talk with you. Lily's face flushed. Her eyes lit up, and a genuine smile spread across her face. Really? Professor Slughorn said that. Snape's expression was more complicated. His chin lifted slightly, pride flickering there, but caution still lingered in his eyes. He'd heard praise like that before. Talent beyond one's peers often came with an unspoken addition in Slytherin. But your blood doesn't match it. So you knew who we were, Snape said, his voice tight, steering the conversation back. Then what we just saw, that wasn't something a first year should be able to do, Mr. Black. Regulus met his gaze. He knew what Snape was like at this age. He was sensitive, insecure and proud. A bundle of contradictions. Wary of purebloods, yet secretly longing to belong among them. Spell analysis and magical interference, Regulus said. The principles aren't complicated. They just demand extremely fine control. And magic perception. How fine? Snape pressed. Sensitive, insecure, proud, and rude, Regulus noted to himself. Still, Snape was valuable. Fine enough that most adult wizards can't manage it, Regulus replied evenly. I've practiced for a long time. Lily looked at him with curiosity. How long have you been practicing magic? As long as I can remember, Regulus said lightly. My family has a library. The Black family library was famous. Then again, every old family had one. But no amount of books could truly let a child master advanced magic alone. Lily accepted the explanation anyway. She was Muggle-born. She had no frame of reference for how pureblood families educated their children. She nodded, a bit more warmth in her eyes. So you're the type who likes studying too? Studying is necessary, Regulus agreed. For wizards, knowledge is power. And for Muggles, even more so. That made Snape's brow lift slightly. He glanced at Regulus, the wariness in his eyes easing, replaced by a measure of agreement. So, Snape asked, which house are you going to? Slytherin, Regulus answered without hesitation. It's a family tradition. Lily's expression dimmed for a moment. She glanced at Snape, then back at Regulus. Her lips moved, then she said, Slytherin, isn't so bad. Severus is there. And in her mind, she added, but there are also a lot of people there who hate people like me. Regulus understood. He simply nodded. Every house has people worth learning from. And people not worth your time. That brightened Lily immediately. She smiled. You're right. Then, see you at the sorting. See you at the sorting. Lily tugged lightly at Snape's sleeve. We should go back, Severus. Snape gave Regulus one last look, nodded, and turned away. Lily waved before following him. The compartment fell quiet again. Chapter 13, Where the Dream Begins. At some point, the rain stopped. The clouds split apart, and the last light of sunset slanted in from the west, bathing the train car in a warm wash of orange. The outline of the Scottish Highlands had already come into view. Dark green hills rose and fell in the distance, their shapes softened by dusk. A gentle female voice sounded over the train's speakers, announcing that they were about to arrive and asking students to gather their belongings and prepare to disembark. Regulus closed his notebook and slipped it back inside his robe. The train thundered along the tracks, wheels striking steel in a steady rhythm, clank, clank, clank. They arrived at exactly 7 in the evening. The night sky was thick with stars. There was no moon, but the starlight was bright enough to illuminate the crowded platform and the rolling clouds of white steam. Cold, damp air rushed into the carriages, carrying the distinct scent of the highlands, earth, and pine needles layered with something unmistakably magical. First years. This way. A booming voice rang out across the platform. Regulus stepped down with the flow of students. The platform was packed. Older students hurried toward the waiting carriages, while the first years gathered around a towering figure holding a lantern. Rubeus Hagrid, gamekeeper and keeper of keys. He loomed like a walking hill, the lantern's orange glow lighting up his thick beard and friendly smile. Come in, then. Follow me. Watch your step. Regulus followed the group down a steep, narrow path. It wound through dense trees, the stones underfoot slick with moisture. The darkness was thick enough that he could only make out the outlines of robes ahead and the occasional swing of lantern light. The forest opened all at once. A vast, black lake stretched out before them, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the star-filled sky. And on the cliffs across the water stood Hogwarts. Towers and spires rose like a forest of stone, piercing the night. Warm yellow light glowed from the windows, as though stars themselves had been caught and set into the walls. The castle shimmered faintly under the starlight, ancient and solemn, wrapped in mystery. Like an old legend waiting to be stepped into. The first years drew in a collective breath. Someone whispered in awe. Someone else grabbed a friend's sleeve, trembling with excitement. Regulus stood at the lake's edge and looked up at the castle. He'd read about it countless times. He'd imagined it in his dreams more times than he could count. But the real Hogwarts was greater than every description, grander than every imagined version, deeper and more unknowable. It was a dream. And it was where the dream began. No more than 4 to a boat. Hagrid's voice pulled them back. He pointed toward a row of small wooden boats moored along the shore. They were plain, without oars, yet ready to move on their own. The first years began to board. Regulus ended up in a boat with 3 unfamiliar boys. One was red-haired and freckled, likely a Weasley. Another had black hair and a tight, nervous expression. The third was blonde and kept fussing with his collar. The boat glided silently toward the center of the lake. The water below was pitch black, unfathomably deep. Something moved beneath the surface, casting slow, massive shadows. Now and then, a broad fin broke the water, catching starlight with a cold gleam. "That's the giant squid," the red-haired boy whispered, fear and excitement tangled in his voice. "My brother says it doesn't hurt anyone. It even saves students who fall in." The boat rocked suddenly. Everyone grabbed the sides. Regulus remained steady. He looked down at the water, at the drifting shadows, at the stars reflected on the surface. Then he lifted his gaze to the castle, drawing ever closer. Behind those glowing windows, he could already picture it. 4 long house tables laden with food. Older students talking and laughing. Professors murmuring among themselves at the staff table. And at the far end of the hall, a wooden stool waited. On it sat the battered Sorting Hat, ready to sing Hogwarts song in its cracked, unpleasant voice. The boats reached the shore. They climbed a flight of stone steps and stopped before massive oak doors. Hagrid raised his huge fist and knocked 3 times. The doors swung open. Professor McGonagall stood just inside. She wore deep green robes, her hair pulled into a severe bun. Her expression was as stern as if she were presiding over a trial. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said, her voice clear and composed, carrying through the echoing entrance hall. "Before you enter the Great Hall for the sorting ceremony, there are a few things you must know." Regulus stood among the first years, listening as she explained the house system, the house cup, and the rules of discipline. His gaze slipped through the open doorway, into the hall beyond. Thousands of candles floated overhead. Students filled the 4 long tables, silverware gleaming in the candlelight, robes blending into rivers of color. Scarlet and gold. Yellow and black. Blue and bronze. Green and silver. At the staff table, he recognized familiar faces. Dumbledore sat at the center, blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles surveying the noisy students with gentle interest. Slughorn's round belly strained against his waistcoat as he smiled broadly. Tiny Professor Flitwick perched on a tall chair, chatting with the warm-faced Professor Sprout beside him. Regulus's gaze drifted to the Slytherin table. Nearly everyone sat with careful posture, doing their best to project elegance and restraint. At the Gryffindor table, James Potter sat rigidly upright, eyes fixed on the entrance. Sirius sat beside him, turned away from the doors, speaking quietly with Remus. Lily Evans sat a little farther down, animatedly talking to a dark-haired girl beside her. "Now, line up in single file," Professor McGonagall said. "Follow me." The first years nervously adjusted their robes and formed a line. Regulus stood in the middle, a sniffling girl in front of him and a boy trembling behind him. They entered the hall. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Whispers surged and faded like waves. Regulus could feel the weight of those looks, scrutiny, curiosity, expectation, disdain. He walked calmly, eyes forward. At the far end of the hall, Professor McGonagall stopped beside a tall stool. Resting on it was a battered, patched, pointed wizard's hat. It twitched. A seam along the brim split open like a mouth, and it began to sing. The song was old and raspy, telling the story of the 4 houses and their traits. Regulus listened, but his thoughts drifted. He thought of the train. Of James's stunned expression. Of the respect in Remus's eyes. Of Peter's frightened shaking. Of Sirius, who hadn't spoken to him. Of the stars beyond the window. The song ended, and applause rippled through the hall. Professor McGonagall unfurled a long parchment scroll. "When I call your name, step forward and put on the sorting hat." The first name was called. A trembling girl stepped up. The hat slipped down over her eyes. A few seconds later, it shouted, Hufflepuff. Cheers erupted from the yellow and black table. One name after another. One house after another. Regulus waited. Regulus Black. The whispers swelled instantly. Almost everyone knew the name. Even Muggle-born students had heard that his brother had shattered 500 years of Black family tradition by going to Gryffindor the year before. All eyes were on him. Where would this Black go? Regulus stepped forward calmly and sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall placed the sorting hat on his head. It was large, blocking out his vision and the light. Then a faint voice sounded directly inside his mind. Another Black. Clever, very clever, far too mature for your age. What are you thinking about? Not power. Not glory, you're looking much farther ahead, very far. Regulus kept his thoughts steady. Ravenclaw would suit your mind. You have courage as well. But you seek knowledge, then perhaps the best place is. The hat drew in a deep breath and shouted, Slytherin. The green and silver table erupted in applause. Robistan clapped first. Avery and Mulciber joined in, their expressions complicated. Boos rose from the Gryffindor table, led by James. Sirius stayed silent. Regulus stood and walked to the Slytherin table, taking a seat beside Robistan. Welcome, Robistan said. Thank you, Regulus replied. The Slytherins around him reached out to shake his hand. The sorting continued. More familiar names were called. More students went to their houses. But Regulus no longer paid attention. He lifted his gaze to the enchanted ceiling high above, where it reflected the night sky outside. The Milky Way stretched across it, stars scattered in endless depth. Infinite. Chapter 14, The Slytherin Traditional Program. Even a culinary wasteland has its oases. Hogwarts's dinner was, by all standards, satisfying. Once the meal ended, the 7th-year Slytherin prefect, Lucretius Burke, rose from his seat and tapped his silver spoon lightly against his goblet. Slytherin first years, with me. Regulus and the other 11 new students stood and followed him away from the long table, out through a side door of the Great Hall, and down a long spiral staircase of stone. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The walls shifted to smooth black marble, and the torches burned with an eerie emerald flame. They stopped before a bare stone wall. The only decoration was a roughly carved stone serpent. The prefect turned to face them. I am Lucretius Burke, 7th-year prefect. His gaze passed over every face, lingering a moment longer on Regulus. Welcome to Slytherin. Before we enter, there are a few things you need to understand. First, Slytherin values bloodline, ambition, and intelligence. You need all three. Second, loyalty is paramount. Loyalty to your own. Your roommates and housemates will be your most reliable allies, or your most dangerous enemies. Third, Slytherin has no patience for weakness. Tears and tattling will only make you a joke. His eyes swept back to Regulus. And finally, remember this. What happened with the Black family last year brought shame to Slytherin. This year, we expect someone to restore that reputation. The implication was barely disguised. Several first years glanced toward Regulus. Regulus remained calm and said nothing. He already knew there would be a performance tonight. The prefect turned to the stone wall and said clearly, Glory. The stone serpent's eyes flared red. The wall slid open without a sound. The Slytherin common room. The space was long and rectangular. Silver-green drapes hung from the ceiling. One wall was made entirely of enchanted glass, revealing the depths of the black lake beyond. The giant squid drifted past at a leisurely pace. Glowing jellyfish floated like ghosts. The fireplace burned with green flames that made no sound at all. The furniture was dark wood trimmed with silver, upholstered in deep green velvet. Portraits of famous Slytherins from past generations lined the walls, their gazes sharp and appraising as they studied the newcomers. Quite a few upperclassmen were already present. As the first years entered, every conversation stopped. Curiosity, indifference, and open amusement flickered across their faces. Lucretius stopped by the fireplace. You're free to move about. The first-year dormitory assignments are posted on the wall over there. The new students surged toward the parchment lists. Regulus didn't hurry. He stayed where he was, calmly taking in the room. Then he heard his name. Not someone calling him. Someone talking about him. The voice came from the sofa area to the right. A group of fifth-year boys lounged there. The one speaking had black hair and a hooked nose, his smile sharp with mockery. Another black. Why not just head straight to the lion's den together? The boys around him laughed, not kindly. The common room fell quiet. Upperclassmen paused mid-conversation. Younger students held their breath. No one intervened. Everyone was waiting to see how this new black would respond. Regulus turned slowly to face the speaker. Are you talking about me? His voice was calm, not raised. The boy arched an eyebrow. If you're Regulus Black, then yes. I am. I am, Regulus replied evenly. So what do you want? He'd expected someone to step forward. In fact, he'd been hoping for it. The boy stood. He was a head taller than Regulus. Fine silver embroidery marked the cuffs of his robes, the crest of the Traverse family. I'm just curious, he said as he approached, unhurried. Is this generation of blacks especially independent? Your brother chose Gryffindor. What about you? He leaned in slightly. How long do you plan to last in Slytherin? A term? Or until you find more interesting friends? His followers laughed again, spreading out to loosely surround Regulus. Regulus's grey eyes met his without a ripple. Mr. Traverse, he said, using the surname deliberately. If I remember correctly, the Traverse family entered a marriage with a Muggle merchant in the 18th century to salvage a failing business. He paused. That incident is recorded in Chapter 7, Section 3 of A Secret History of Pureblood Families. Would you like me to remind you of the exact passage? Your pride has a stain. The boy's face flushed scarlet. The whispers around them grew louder. Several upperclassmen exchanged glances. What nonsense are you spouting? The boy snapped, his voice shooting upward. A Secret History of Pureblood Families, by Broderick Bode, Regulus replied, tone unchanged. Citing original trade contracts and marriage registries. Shall I recite it? The boy opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand clenched, knuckles widening. Regulus looked at him and continued. Of course, that's the past. What matters is the present. You mentioned independence. I don't see independence as a flaw. Blind obedience, on the other hand, is. His gaze swept the common room. Several of the boy's followers avoided eye contact. Slytherin values intelligence. Intelligence means independent thought. Knowing what's worth pursuing, and what isn't. My brother chose his path. I chose mine. That's independence. And you? Regulus looked back at the boy, his expression calm, the pressure unmistakable. You chose to announce your existence on a first year's first night with cheap provocation. Is that your idea of independence? Every gaze shifted from Regulus to Traverse. The boy's face cycled from red to pale to a sickly green. His hand shot toward his inner pocket, reaching for his wand. Regulus was faster. His wand slid into his hand and flicked lightly through the air. The space in front of Traverse twisted. An invisible barrier snapped into place. The instant his wand cleared the robe, it struck the barrier with a sharp clink, flew from his grasp, spun upward toward the ceiling. And froze there, motionless. A perfect interception. Regulus rotated his wrist. The wand began to descend, slow and controlled, as if held by an unseen hand. It settled upright at Traverse's feet, tip resting gently on the carpet. The entire exchange was silent and precise, without a hint of temper. If you really want a match, Regulus said, pocketing his wand, I suggest you start by learning how to hold onto yours. A few first years were on the verge of gasping. Regulus took a step forward. The companions exchanged looks and parted without a word. One older girl started to speak, only to be stopped by another, who shook her head. Now, Regulus said. His voice was still quiet, yet everyone heard it. Pick it up. Someone glanced toward Lucretius. The prefect remained completely still. Traverse's face looked ready to explode. Even his hair seemed to bristle. His body shook, his eyes burning with hatred. Regulus remained calm. Everyone else wore complicated expressions. A first year, making a fifth year unable even to draw his wand. Everyone understood what that meant. Strong. Not someone to provoke. And cruel. The humiliation was unmistakable. In that instant, the common room's impression of Regulus shifted, away from the one with a traitor in the family, to something far more dangerous. Regulus didn't need a wand to do this. But he had promised Orion not to act out of the ordinary at school. So he used one. Traverse's chest heaved. Just as some thought he might lash out, he suddenly bent down, snatched up his wand, and shoved his way through the crowd, disappearing around the corner toward the dormitories. His companions followed in silence, without even a parting threat. Regulus turned and headed for the dormitory list. The first years stepped aside to clear a path. This barely counted as a confrontation. It felt like bullying a child. Regulus found it dull. The boy had been weak and foolish. Regulus knew the encounter had been arranged on purpose. He didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed it. The common room stayed quiet until Regulus reached the wall. Then whispers resumed, tinged with shock. Several older students exchanged glances. A seventh-year girl with dark brown hair, wearing a rosier family brooch, murmured to her companion, "He's interesting." A boy from the Knott family nodded, his gaze lingering on Regulus. One proud-looking older student asked, "Did you see it?" Another girl with an elegant air nodded silently. The younger students were completely stunned. A first-year girl grabbed her friend's arm, whispering excitedly, "That just now, was that a nonverbal spell?" In first year. A round-faced boy swallowed. I think so." Regulus ignored them. He found his name on the list. First-year dormitory A. Regulus Black. Cuthbert Avery. Hermes Mulciber. Alex Rosier. Chapter 15, I'm getting along with my roommates. The dormitory was down a corridor deeper inside the common room. The door was thick oak, marked with a single letter. A. Regulus Black pushed it open. The room beyond was spacious, four-poster beds set in the corners with dark green hangings. Each student had their own desk area. From the windows, the black lake stretched out like a sheet of ink. Two boys were already inside. Cuthbert Avery sat on the bed by the window, lining up his stationery with the sort of care that looked effortless. Blonde hair, blue eyes, chin tipped just slightly upward. When he saw Regulus, he gave a minimal nod. Black. Avery. On the bed farthest in, another boy sat with a copy of Curses and Counter-Curses in his hands. Black hair, pale face, shadows lingering under his eyes like he hadn't slept properly in a week. Hermes Mulciber glanced up once. His gaze was dark and unreadable, but he still inclined his head in greeting. Regulus set his trunk on one of the empty beds and began unpacking. Books went onto the shelf in timetable order. Quills and ink were placed neatly on the desk. Robes were hung in the wardrobe. The door opened again. The fourth boy stepped in, brown-haired with grey eyes and a mild expression. His robes were tidy, though not flashy. Alex Rosier. A branch of the Rosier family, with parents who worked low-level posts at the Ministry of Magic. Not as influential as the main line, but still pure blood. "Hi," Alex said, voice gentle. "I'm Alex Rosier." Avery glanced at him and gave a cool nod. "Avery." Mulciber didn't look up. Regulus said, "Regulus Black." Alex smiled, set his trunk on the last empty bed, and began unpacking. He was directly opposite Regulus. The air in the room felt careful. Regulus watched anyway, quietly sorting the pieces into place. Avery was the proud pure-blood core, the sort who wore his bloodline like a badge. Mulciber had the look of someone who lived half in the shadows and preferred it that way. Alex sat on the edge of that world, polite and mild, a pure-blood who hadn't grown teeth from it. Avery's eyes slid to Regulus. "Back in the common room, you made Traverse look stupid." Regulus didn't turn. He managed that himself. "His uncle's in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement," Avery said. "Not a small position." Regulus's tone didn't change. "And?" Avery's mouth twitched, amused, and there was something in his eyes that said, "I get it." "So," he said, "well done. The Traverse family's always acted like they're better than everyone else. Funny thing is, who doesn't know their mess?" Regulus turned then, meeting his stare. Avery leaned back against his pillows, as relaxed as if they'd been friends for years. "My father says Slytherin needs new blood this year. People with real ability, not idiots who can only show off their family tree." His gaze sharpened on Regulus. "You don't look like an idiot." "What about you?" Regulus asked. Avery blinked. "What?" Regulus repeated it, calm as ever. "Are you an idiot?" Alex, who'd been sorting his things quietly, paused and lifted his head, watching without saying a word. For 2 seconds, Avery held Regulus's eyes. Then he said, evenly, "You'll find out." Regulus nodded once. "Looking forward to it." Mulciber spoke for the first time, voice low. "That thing you did, knocking a wand spell away. How'd you do it?" Every gaze in the room shifted to Regulus. "Protego," Regulus said. "With a bit of technique." "What technique?" Mulciber pressed. Regulus didn't answer that. Instead, he asked, "You can cast Protego." Protego was not a first-year trick. It took control and intent, the kind you usually didn't see from children who were still struggling to keep a feather hovering without it wobbling. Everyone in the room came from pure-blood families. They all knew what it meant for a first year to do it cleanly. They also knew it didn't happen overnight. Mulciber went quiet. The way he looked at Regulus changed, but it wasn't awe. It was assessment, with suspicion threaded through it. Alex sucked in a breath. "My dad said only a handful of people at the ministry can cast it properly." Avery's stare sharpened. "My father said." Regulus cut him off. "Why don't you say what you think?" Avery froze like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. What was he supposed to say? No one had ever asked him that. In the Avery household, his father's opinion was law. In pure-blood gatherings, elders set the rules of reality. Even in Slytherin, older students' experience was treated like scripture. Avery had learned to borrow authority. To quote it, repeat it, hide behind it. And now, with one question, Regulus had peeled it off him like a cloak. Something hot and unfamiliar crawled up Avery's spine. Shame. He realized he'd been using his father's name as armor and the boy in front of him had seen straight through it. Avery inhaled, steadying himself, forcing his chin higher like he could hold himself up that way. "Protego needs precise control," he said, and his voice wasn't as smooth as he wanted it to be. "And clear intent. The first comes from practice. The second comes from will." He swallowed, kept going anyway. "Most first years can't even keep a feather floating without it shaking." His eyes stayed on Regulus. "So you're not most first years?" Regulus nodded, accepting that. "Then you aren't either," he said. Avery blinked. "If you can see that much," Regulus went on, "you've got judgment. You're paying attention. That's not nothing." For a beat, Avery looked like he didn't know what to do with that. Then he let out a short laugh, like he'd surprised himself, and shrugged, sinking back against the pillows again. "Fine." Across the room, Alex Rosier had been holding his breath the entire time. He looked from Regulus to Cuthbert, wide-eyed with confusion and a twist of unease. In Alex's home, in that careful, courteous Rosier branch that never stepped out of line, nobody spoke like this. Not so direct. Not so sharp. He admired Regulus's calm. He also found it unsettling. He doesn't feel 11, Alex thought, watching Regulus with the vague dread of realizing someone your own age is moving through the world with a completely different set of rules. He feels like those department heads at the ministry who walk fast down the halls and never waste a word. Tonight, he decided, he was writing to his parents. He wanted to know what was going on with the Black family's second son. The room fell into silence. Hogwarts's first class for the Slytherin first years was potions. In the wizarding world, potions was a kind of measuring stick, how careful you were, how precise, how patient. Slytherin liked to pretend those were its natural virtues. At the very least, that was the story. The potions classroom was in the castle's lower levels, a little higher than the Slytherin common room but just as cold. The air had that damp stone bite to it, laced with old fumes and something herbal that never quite faded. By the time Regulus stepped inside, most of the students were already seated. Long tables were lined up in neat rows. Each station had 2 cauldron stands, a basic tool set, and a pile of ingredients waiting like a dare. He checked the seating chart. Slughorn had clearly put thought into it. Slytherin and Gryffindor shared the lesson, but the seats were interwoven instead of split. Either it was meant to encourage house unity, or it was meant for entertainment. Regulus's seat was in the 3rd row. His partner was a Gryffindor girl with blonde hair and freckles. She was flipping through magical drafts and potions. When he sat down, she looked up, eyes brightening. "You're Regulus Black." "I am. I'm Mary MacDonald." The words spilled out quickly. I heard yesterday on the train you made James Potter's spell vanish. News traveled fast. Regulus nodded once, leaving it there. Mary practically lit up at the confirmation. You should have made James Potter vanish too. I've heard they're awful. Regulus blinked, a little surprised. So James already had a reputation. And if that was true, Sirius had probably helped build it. Mary didn't say more with Regulus right in front of her, but the point was clear enough. Even Gryffindor students were starting to get sick of it. She looked like she wanted to ask something else, but the classroom door swung open before she could. Horace Slughorn swept in. He was round and rosy, dressed in a dark green robe heavy with gold embroidery, the buttons over his stomach pulled tight like they were under protest. His presence filled the room the way perfume did, loud, rich, impossible to ignore. Ah! Welcome, welcome! Slughorn boomed, all theatrical warmth. Welcome to the world of potions, the most delicate, most dangerous, and most rewarding of the magical arts. He reached the front, planted both hands on the desk, and beamed at them as if he'd personally invited each student. I am Horace Slughorn, your potions master, he announced. And for the next 7 years, or at least until you've taken your O.W.L.S., I will be guiding you through the wonders that can be found in a cauldron. His eyes drifted over their faces, lingering here and there as though he were taking notes. Some of you may have heard of me, he went on, smiling wider. Some of you may have heard of my little club. A ripple of interest stirred through the room. But I assure you, Slughorn said, voice bright, in my classroom, what matters is your skill and your focus. Most of all, your love for the craft. Chapter 16, Choosing Sides. The end result of potions class wasn't a mystery. When Professor Horace Slughorn called time and told everyone to bottle their work for inspection, Regulus Black's vial looked like it belonged on an entirely different table. Around it, other bottles were questionable. Some were the wrong color. Some were cloudy with bits still floating inside. A few burbled with suspicious little bubbles, like they couldn't decide whether they were done brewing or about to explode. Only Regulus's potion sat perfectly clear, a pale green that caught the light like something clean and alive. When the liquid settled, there wasn't even a hint of sediment. Slughorn picked it up and held it to the torchlight for a long moment, his round face openly delighted. Exemplary! He announced, voice booming off the dungeon walls. Mr. Black, this is well past acceptable, it's excellent. Tell me, did you use some special technique? I just treated the ingredients properly, Professor, Regulus said, calm as ever. He didn't sound like he was showing off. He sounded like he was reciting facts. Snake fang powder needs to dissolve completely. The tip of the porcupine quill carries the strongest concentration of magic. And the fluxweed's balancing effect has to be timed precisely. Slughorn's eyes brightened. You mentioned where the magic is most concentrated. Is that something you observed yourself? Yes, Professor, Regulus said. By sensing the faint magic the materials give off. Whispers flickered through the room. Sensing an ingredient's magic? Was that something a first year was even supposed to be able to do? Slughorn didn't push. He just gave Regulus an approving look and nodded once. Come to my office after class, Mr. Black. Afterward, Regulus spent 10 minutes in Slughorn's office. The professor was warm and expansive, showing off shelves of rare ingredients with the pride of a collector. He hinted, not very subtly, at the existence of the Slug Club. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he handed Regulus a small vial of Felix Felicis as encouragement. It was diluted, but even so, for a first year it was an unbelievable gift. Keep that talent sharp, my boy, Slughorn said, patting his shoulder. Potions isn't only nimble hands, it's sensitivity. You've got that. Regulus thanked him and slipped the diluted Felix Felicis into the inside pocket of his robes as he left. Used well, it could save your life. Used badly, it could create problems you'd regret. Transfiguration was held on the second floor in a bright classroom with wide windows. Sunlight spilled across the desks, and the air smelled faintly of wood and parchment. Professor McGonagall was already waiting at the front. She wore a dark green robe, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her expression as sharp as her posture. Transfiguration, she began once everyone was seated, is among the most complex, most dangerous, and most elegant branches of magic. It requires precise incantation, clear intent, and an understanding of matter itself. She lifted her wand and tapped the desk lightly. A matchstick became a silver needle. Today, we start with the basics, she said. Match to needle. Matchsticks were passed out. Students began to try. The room quickly filled with mumbled spells and frantic wand movements. Most of the matchsticks only twisted and warped, turning into awkward little things that were neither match nor needle. Regulus picked up his matchstick and studied it. Stable structure. Wood fibers arranged in a predictable pattern. A sulfur tip with its own composition. Shape, density, balance. Transfiguration didn't create something from nothing. It changed what was already there. Rearrange wood into a metallic crystal structure. Convert the sulfur into a silver point. Keep the object continuous, whole, instead of tearing it apart and pretending it was fine. He raised his wand and spoke softly. He barely tapped the matchstick. It shivered once on the tabletop, then the change began, gradual and smooth. The brown wood lightened into silver white as the grain vanished and the surface turned sleek. The sulfur head shrank, reshaped, sharpened. 3 seconds. When it was done, a perfect silver needle lay on the desk, straight as a drawn line, the eye cleanly formed. McGonagall happened to reach his table on her circuit. She stopped, looked down, then picked the needle up and held it to the light. Perfect transfiguration, she said, and there was a trace of surprise in her voice. One attempt. No repeated corrections. No residue. Mr. Black, have you practiced this spell before? I've practiced the principles, Professor, Regulus replied. But this is my first time using it on a matchstick. The principles. The stability of material structure, Regulus said, taking the opening without hesitation. And conversion efficiency. He paused, then added, Professor, may I ask a question? McGonagall's brow lifted slightly. Go on. What are we actually changing? Regulus held up the needle. We turn a matchstick into a needle, but in the process, what changes? Is it the object's essential nature, or only its outward form? If it's the first, is the match truly a needle now? If it's the second, how is it different from an illusion? The classroom went quiet. Even a few students still wrestling with their matchsticks looked up. McGonagall's focus sharpened. She studied him for a few seconds, then said slowly, that is not a question most first years think to ask, Mr. Black. I still want the answer, Regulus said. McGonagall set the needle down and moved to the front, turning to face the class. Mr. Black has asked something important, she said. The core difference between transfiguration and illusion is material continuity. An illusion creates an image without substance. Transfiguration guides existing matter to reorganize along a magical path. She picked up another matchstick and tapped it. It became a feather. This feather, she said, holding it up, was a matchstick. The material foundation did not vanish. It was rearranged. That is why true transfiguration requires an understanding of what you are changing. You must know how wood becomes feather structure, and you must guide that conversion, not simply alter appearances. Her gaze returned to Regulus. Does that satisfy you? Partly, Professor, Regulus said, inclining his head from his seat. But it leads to another question. If transfiguration is matter reorganized, then what about the vanishing spell? It makes an object disappear entirely. Where does the matter go? Or is vanishing an extreme form of transfiguration, turning something into nothing? This time, even McGonagall went still. The room held its breath. Students stared at her, not even sure what the question meant, only aware that it was the kind of thing you didn't usually ask a teacher on the first week. McGonagall drew in a measured breath. The vanishing spell is N.E.W.T level material, she said at last, each word precise. It involves the conversion of matter and energy, as well as theoretical magic across dimensional boundaries. Her eyes didn't leave him. Focus on the task in front of you, Mr. Black. Your match to needle is excellent. 5 points to Slytherin. She turned back to the rest of the room and resumed her instruction. For the remainder of the lesson, Regulus could feel her gaze touch down on him now and then, brief and assessing. Regulus stayed quiet. He already knew the answer to his own question. What interested him more was the difference in McGonagall's response compared to Slughorn's. One encouraged. One watched. It was a kind of line being drawn. A choice of sides. When transfiguration ended, Regulus had only just stepped out into the corridor when someone blocked his path. Narcissus stood near the corner, her long blonde hair catching the sunlight until it almost seemed to glow. As a seventh year, she carried herself with a practiced elegance. Her dark green school robes were pressed perfectly flat, and the silver Slytherin badge at her collar shone like it had been polished that morning. Regulus. Cousin Narcissa. Come with me, she said. We need to talk. She turned into a quieter side passage. Regulus followed. Narcissa stopped and faced him. I heard about last night in the common room, she said bluntly. You humiliated a Traverse boy in front of everyone. He asked for it. I know, Narcissa said, and there was a hint of approval under the sharpness. He is an idiot. His father's ministry position came through marriage connections, not ability. That isn't the point. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. The point is that you showed too much, Regulus. First day. First night. In front of all of Slytherin. Do you understand what that means? Regulus met her eyes, steady. It means I'm not easy to push around. It means you're on certain people's radar, Narcissa corrected. Earlier than you expected. She glanced around once, making sure they were alone, then continued, quieter still. At breakfast, Robistan Lestrange asked about you. You know him, Rodolphus's brother. He had questions. What training you've had? How strong your magic is? What you think about certain things? What things? Regulus asked. Narcissa's stare hardened. You know what things? Then she said it, crisp as a verdict. He's paying attention to talented young wizards. Especially purebloods. Your brother's betrayal dragged the Black family down in his eyes. But now you've appeared, younger, more gifted, and you look like you fit what he wants from a Black. Comment. 5 comment. Vote. Chapter 17, Chapter 17, you can do that? Narcissa's expression tightened, her tone turning sharp and serious. Bellatrix already knows. She'll contact you soon, either by letter or she'll come to Hogwarts herself. She'll test you, size you up, and then decide whether you're worth recommending to Voldemort. Regulus was quiet for a few seconds. So what's your advice? He asked at last. Rein it in, Narcissa said. At least in public. You can show talent, but not like that. At Hogwarts, especially with a professor like Slughorn who collects gifted students like trophies, your name will spread fast. And when the wrong people hear it, it brings trouble. She paused, eyes steady on his. Or opportunity, depending on what you want. I already have, Regulus thought. And that was the point, even if it was still early. At 11, you were only good for being observed. Even Voldemort wouldn't send an 11-year-old to do anything real. He wasn't some warlord scraping together child soldiers. Narcissa's voice softened a fraction. I'm not saying this to scold you. You're smarter than I am, Regulus. I've known that since you were 5. But smart people trust themselves too much. They stop watching what's around them. Regulus nodded. Thank you for the warning, cousin. But I have my own reasons. I knew you'd say that. Narcissa sighed. Fine. Just remember, last night isn't over. Traverse won't let it go. He probably won't come after you himself, but he'll send someone. Older students, or his little pack. That's how Slytherin works. I'll welcome it, Regulus said, and with Narcissa, someone he could be slightly less guarded with, the words came out almost casual. Narcissa studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. You know, she said, sometimes I think you and Sirius are actually alike. Not the face. Something deeper. That reckless streak. He uses it to rebel. You use it for something else. She turned to leave, then stopped again. One more thing. Lucius Malfoy is interested in you, she said, and her mouth tightened. Not in that way. If he asks to see you, be polite. And be careful. Regulus nodded once. I know, he thought. Your fiancé. Regulus turned toward his next class, History of Magic with Professor Binns. It would be the easiest lesson of the day. By Friday, the Scottish Highlands sky was washed clean and bright. On the flying practice grounds, 20 broomsticks lay in a neat line. Every one of them was old and uneven, the kind of battered school equipment Hogwarts had clearly been using for years. Madame Hooch stood at the front, short grey hair ruffled by the wind. Her eyes cut over the first years like she was measuring who would break something and how quickly. "All right, everyone, stand on the left side of your broom," she barked. "Right hand out, hold it over the broom, and say it clearly. Up." They did as told, and the lawn filled with uneven shouts. Up. At the front of the Gryffindor line, a red-haired boy with freckles, probably a Weasley, snapped his broom straight into his hand almost instantly. He grinned like he couldn't help himself, earning impressed little noises from the students near him. On the Slytherin side, Cuthbert Avery's broom rolled a half-turn on the grass before it grudgingly lifted. He clicked his tongue, irritated. Hermes Mulciber tried twice. On the second attempt, the broom leapt up so sharply it nearly smacked his chin. Regulus lowered his gaze to the old clean sweep at his feet. "Up," he said, voice level. No coaxing, no hesitation. The broom trembled. It seemed to think about it for a second, then rose into his open palm. "Good," Madame Hooch said, striding between the lines. "Weasley, quick reflexes. Now listen carefully. When I count to 3, you'll kick off gently and rise 1 foot off the ground. Hold it there. No higher than my shoulder. 1, 2, 3. Chaos arrived right on schedule. Brooms shot up. Girls shrieked. Boys yelled like they were daring gravity to try them. At least 4 brooms jerked too high, and 1 Gryffindor girl clutched the handle as she squealed. Madame Hooch snapped her wand up, slowing her and guiding her down before she could panic herself off the thing. Regulus hovered at exactly 1 foot, steady as a fixed point. His body barely moved. Only the hem of his black robes lifted and fell in the cold wind, slow and rhythmic. Merlin's beard, a lanky Gryffindor boy named Benji Fenwick muttered to his friend. "Look at that Slytherin. He's so steady it's like he's glued to the air." Not far away, a brown-haired Gryffindor girl, Sarah Bones, noticed too. Her own hovering was decent, a slight bobbing like she was riding a gentle current. But Regulus was something else entirely. No wasted motion. Every shift of balance looked deliberate, as if he already knew exactly how the broom would respond before it did. "Eyes forward, don't look down," Madame Hooch shouted, wand flicking as she corrected students who started spinning in place. "Now try moving forward slowly." She demonstrated a soft, pressing motion with her hand. "Feel how the broom responds. Treat it like a living partner." The lines began to drift, awkward and scattered. Most first years wobbled along crooked paths, speeding up and slowing down without meaning to. Regulus slid forward about 15 feet, speed constant, line straight. At the next instruction, he turned left smoothly. "Ha! Show off!" A stocky Gryffindor boy with thick eyebrows grumbled loudly. His broom was swaying in uneven arcs, and the contrast with Regulus's control was almost insulting. "He is flying better, Alphard," the girl beside him said, matter of fact. "Better like a block of wood," Alphard said louder, making sure the wind carried his words toward the Slytherins. "Stiff as a statue. Flying takes guts." A few Gryffindors snickered. On the Slytherin side, Cuthbert's brow furrowed. Hermes shot Alphard a dark look. Alex Rosier watched Regulus with nervous concern. Regulus acted as if he hadn't heard a word. Alphard Pruitt's face darkened. When the lesson moved into its second half, Madame Hooch told them to practice basic control on their own while she helped the students who were really struggling. The class immediately broke into small clusters across the field. Alphard deliberately guided his broom toward the edge of the Slytherin space, 2 friends flanking him. "So, Black," he called, hovering a few feet away, "does your family train you to ride a broom like a statue? Gotta keep that noble image, right?" Cuthbert pushed forward at once. "Watch your mouth, Pruitt. I'm talking to Black, Cuthbert," Alphard shot back, chin tipped in challenge. "Or does he need someone else to speak for him?" Regulus turned his head slowly. Grey eyes, calm as still water, settled on Alphard. "Pruitt," he said, not raising his voice, "what are you trying to prove? Gryffindor bravery? Or Pruitt manners? A Slytherin brat lecturing me about manners?" Alphard's voice rose with anger. Regulus only looked at him, letting the silence stretch until Alphard's face started to redden. Then he asked, quietly, "Do you have any?" That did it. Alphard's pride flared hot and stupid. If he didn't do something, he'd be a joke. He yanked out his wand. His 2 friends, Colin Macmillan and Gareth Diggory, followed immediately, wands pointed toward the Slytherins. Want to fight? Cuthbert drew his wand almost at the same time, his face tight with caution and a thread of excitement. Hermes's wand slid into his hand without a word. He drifted forward half a broom length, shoulder to shoulder with Cuthbert, eyes dark. Alex went pale. After a second of hesitation, he lifted his wand too, though his aim was clearly more toward empty air than anyone in particular. Alphard shouted, Expelliarmus! Regulus's wand lifted. Expelliarmus! His spell snapped out faster, cleaner. 2 red jets met midair and collided with pinpoint accuracy, bursting into a spray of sparks. The disarming charms cancelled each other out. What? Alphard blurted. He wasn't the only one. Students nearby stared, frozen. You could do that with Expelliarmus? Chapter 18, Can I switch dorms? Farther off, a few Slytherins who'd been practicing nearby noticed the scene and immediately drifted closer. 3 became 5, 5 became more. Alphard's expression shifted. His 2 friends, Colin and Gareth, exchanged a tense look. At that moment, Regulus raised his left hand. He didn't turn around. His back was to every Slytherin present. Palm upright. Fingers together. A crisp, unmistakable signal to stop. Cuthbert froze. His wand, half raised, sagged but didn't lower all the way. Hermes narrowed his eyes, staring at Regulus's back. His wand stayed up, but the tip began to drift aside. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The Slytherins who'd gathered hesitated. Their brooms hovered, motionless in midair. No one pressed forward. Regulus didn't look back. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. A compliance test. Slytherins were proud, brooding, cautious, and prone to following the current. And now, without a word, they had obeyed him. Getting them to move as one wasn't easy. But once a single person stopped, the rest followed naturally. It traced back to the first night of term, when a 5th-year traverse had been utterly crushed. Authority had been established. Across the way, the Gryffindors who'd started to gather also halted. Eyes flicked between one another, the tension thick but restrained. What's wrong, Black? Alphard said, forcing calm into his voice. Afraid your little helpers will embarrass you. On the contrary, Regulus said, sounding genuinely puzzled. I'm worried they'll act too fast and you won't get the chance to show your courage. Expelliarmus! Alphard snapped, red light firing again. This time, Regulus didn't even speak. His wand lifted slightly. A faint glimmer struck the strap binding the front of Alphard's broom. Reparo. A first-year spell. The sort used to fix chair legs or mend torn robes. Click. The strap tightened abruptly. The broom's nose dipped hard. Alphard's disarming charm shot into the ground as the broom lurched, blasting a small crater in the sand. He yelped and clutched the handle, barely avoiding being thrown off. Reparo, on the strap. A Gryffindor blurted out. Incredible! A Slytherin shouted. Colin rushed to back Alphard up. Rictus Empra. A streak of silver shot toward Regulus's side. Regulus didn't even glance at him. His wand angled down to the left. Aguamenti. Water sprayed across the ground beneath Colin's broom. Mud splashed as the earth turned slick. The old clean sweep still had wheels. They sank straight into the muck. The broom jolted to a dead stop, and Colin's spell veered wildly off course. From the other side, Gareth tried to catch Regulus unaware. Stupefy. This time, Regulus looked at him. Just once. His wand tapped the ground near Gareth's feet. Incendio. A small flame sprang up in the dry grass. Gareth's broom had a woven wicker base. Fire was the last thing it wanted near it. He panicked, yanking upward, and his spell went wide. 3 directions. 3 attacks. Regulus answered each with the most basic spells imaginable, never targeting a person, only the environment and the brooms themselves. Balance shattered. Spells missed. Once was coincidence. Twice was luck. 3 times was a crushing difference in skill. Alphard's face went white. He'd barely stabilized his broom when Regulus's voice reached him. Do you want to keep going? Regulus asked calmly. Or would you like to demonstrate something else? The surrounding Slytherins stared, stunned. He never attacked anyone, a Slytherin girl whispered. He only hit the brooms and the ground, a boy murmured. That's worse than getting hit. And those spells, another added, incredulous. They're all from the first 30 pages of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. I don't believe for a second that's all he knows. Cuthbert watched Regulus's back, expression tangled. He knew every spell Regulus had used. He just couldn't imagine using them like that. Hermes quietly lowered his wand. His gaze lingered on each precise impact point, every choice maximizing effect while minimizing effort. Then a furious shout cut through the field. What do you think you're doing? Madame Hooch stormed in like a gale, her face dark as thunder. Wands down. Now. Alphard and the others hurriedly pocketed their wands and jumped off their brooms, sweat streaking their faces. Pruitt. Macmillan. Diggory. Madame Hooch barked. Using spells during flying class. Against fellow students. Gryffindor loses 30 points. 1 week's detention each. But, Professor. Alphard protested. He used spells too. What spells did Black use? Madame Hooch demanded, sharp eyes locking onto Regulus. Reparo, Professor, Regulus said evenly, meeting her gaze. To reinforce a strap. Aguamenti to reduce dust on the ground. Incendio to dry wet grass. Madame Hooch studied him for several seconds, then the ground, then the broom. The strap was indeed tighter. There was water on the earth. Scorched marks on the turf. Pruitt, she said coolly, are you accusing Black of attacking you with a mending charm? A few stifled snickers rippled through the crowd. Alphard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Another 10 points from Gryffindor, Madame Hooch said flatly. For making a false accusation. Now get inside. All of you. As the Slytherins left, nearly every student who passed Regulus slowed, eyes lingering on him. Surprise. Respect. Approval. Slytherin valued power. It valued intelligence in using it even more. That night, in the Slytherin common room. Green flames crackled softly in the fireplace, casting light over dark drapes and silver accents. First years clustered around the sofas, the afternoon's events the undeniable focus. Why didn't you let us step in? One boy finally asked Regulus. We had the numbers. We could've. Could've what? Regulus cut in, lifting his gaze to the group. Given Gryffindor grounds to appeal. All of us jumping in, he continued quietly. Attacking 3 Gryffindors together. He set down his quill. Slytherins lost the House Cup 3 years in a row. Every 10 points can decide the outcome. Was it worth throwing away dozens? Silence followed. House points hit Slytherin harder than most. The younger the student, the more they cared. And besides, Regulus went on, if you'd joined in, it would have been a brawl. When Madame Hooch arrived, she would have seen Slytherin surrounding 3 Gryffindors. Instead, she saw 3 Gryffindors attacking 1 Slytherin, someone finished softly, and that Slytherin wasn't even fighting back. Just fixing a broom, cleaning the ground, and drying the grass. A few people laughed under their breath. Regulus scanned the room. Some older students had started listening in. He raised his voice slightly. And the result? He stood, addressing the whole common room. Gryffindor lost 40 points. Slytherin lost none. Pruitt and the others are in detention until next week. His chin lifted, energy creeping into his tone. And we gained respect. Madame Hooch saw Slytherin's restraint and discipline. The other houses learned that provoking Slytherin has a price. At that moment, Prefect Lucretius Burke stepped over. He looked down at the younger students. Impulsiveness, mob fights, reckless point losses, he said coolly. That's Gryffindor's way. Slytherin seeks victory, advantage, and glory. Today, Black showed how to strike hardest within the rules, while taking the least damage in return. He turned to Regulus. You earned respect for the house and avoided a disastrous penalty. Well done. Several older students nodded. The first years stared at Regulus with a mix of awe and envy. So soon after arriving, and he already had a prefect's public approval. Regulus inclined his head. I only made the choice that benefited the house most. Back in the dormitory, Cuthbert paused mid-essay and looked up. You did it on purpose, he said. Regulus returned an amused glance. Did what on purpose? Cuthbert wasn't like some of the brainless purebloods. He thought. Hermes also lifted his head from his book, watching Regulus closely. He'd felt it too. Something had been off earlier. Regulus didn't wait for Cuthbert to elaborate. He turned to Hermes instead. "You were thinking of casting at me," Regulus said calmly. Hermes's eyes tightened. The thought had crossed his mind, just for an instant. He noticed that. Was that a bluff? He stayed silent. Cuthbert narrowed his eyes, looking between the two of them. Alex held his breath, doing his absolute best to remain unnoticed. "Can I change dorms? This place is terrifying." Chapter 19, Charms. The Charms classroom sat on the 7th floor of the castle. Its windows faced east, and when the morning light slanted in, you could see dust motes drifting lazily through the air. Regulus sat in the second row of the Slytherin section. To his right was Cuthbert Avery. One seat to his left sat Alex Rosier. Alex was nervously flipping through Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, murmuring the pronunciation of the levitation charm under his breath. "Relax, Rosier," Avery said with a sideways glance, his tone edged with mockery. "Professor Flitwick isn't going to eat you." "I just want to make sure I say it right," Alex muttered. The classroom door creaked softly as it opened. Professor Phileas Flitwick all but floated inside. He was so small that he had to stand atop a stack of thick books to see over the lectern. But once he settled there and those bright eyes swept across the room, the chatter died instantly. "Good morning, children." Flitwick's voice was high but clear. "Today, we'll be learning one of the most fundamental spells in magic, the levitation charm. It looks simple, but it carries the essence of spellcasting itself." He flicked his wand, and a white feather drifted out of a box on the lectern, hovering in the middle of the classroom. "Now, repeat after me," Flitwick said, raising his wand. "Wingardium Leviosa. 3 things to remember. A smooth, arcing wrist motion, stretch the gar, and on the final essay, release your breath gently." A feather lay on every desk. Uneven chanting filled the room. Regulus lifted his wand slightly. "Wingardium Leviosa." His voice was steady. His motion precise. The feather rose slowly, steady as if suspended by an invisible thread. It hovered in front of him without the slightest tremor. Perfect. 5 points to Slytherin. Professor Flitwick nearly hopped off his stack of books as he hurried over, craning his head to study the feather. "Look at that stability. Not a hint of wobble. Mr. Black, have you practiced this before?" The same question Professor McGonagall had asked. "I just listened carefully to your explanation, Professor," Regulus said modestly. "Excellent. Simply excellent!" Flitwick exclaimed, his small hands fluttering. "Mr. Black, perhaps you'd be willing to demonstrate for the class?" "Of course." Regulus inclined his head. He let the feather drift down, then cast the spell again. Wingardium Leviosa. Under dozens of watchful eyes, the feather floated up once more, stopping at exactly the same height. "Observe the movement," Flitwick called out. "Pronunciation matters, but so does the wand motion. Remember, an arc." Regulus guided the feather back onto the desk, then looked up. "Professor, may I ask a question?" "Ask away, my boy." "Ask." "I was wondering," Regulus said, "when the levitation charm acts on an object, does it strip away its weight, or does magic form an invisible support for it? If it's the former, does the object's mass still exist? If it's the latter, is the magical support evenly distributed, or focused on a specific point?" The room went utterly quiet. Heads turned toward him. Most of them were only thinking about getting the feather off the desk. None had considered what was happening beneath the spell. Regulus's question felt like it was peeling back the charm's surface. Professor Flitwick adjusted his round spectacles, admiration flickering in his eyes. "What a marvelous question! Very few first years think about magic at this level." He gave a light wave of his wand. Another feather lifted from the lectern, hovered briefly, then descended. "The answer is that it's a bit of both, but the core lies in the balance between magic and mass. The levitation charm doesn't truly remove weight. Mass is intrinsic to an object, just as the soul cannot exist without the body. Magic cannot erase it." His wand tip pointed to the floating feather. A faint silver glow formed around it. "What we do is act upon the object with magic. A wizard's magic repels gravity while evenly enveloping the object, like clothing it in a light cloak woven of magic. The support is distributed throughout. Only then can the object hover steadily, without tilting or spinning." Regulus nodded slightly, then pressed on. And if the object's mass changes? For example, if a drop of water lands on a floating feather, does the magic adjust on its own, or does the caster need to re-guide it? An excellent extension, Flitwick said, his voice rising with excitement. Magic is linked to the caster. When an object's mass changes, the magic senses it immediately and adjusts. But that requires the caster to maintain focus. The connection can't be broken. He looked at Regulus, smiling warmly. If concentration falters, the magic disperses. The object will either fall, or drift as the added weight pulls it off balance. The fact that you thought of this tells me you're not just casting spells. You're thinking. And that's the key to becoming a great wizard. Thank you, Professor, Regulus said sincerely. I learned a lot. Flitwick beamed up at him. Keep thinking like that. Another 5 points to Slytherin. Lo, excited chatter rippled through the Slytherin benches. Ravenclaws kept glancing their way as well. Regulus knew Flitwick's explanation reflected the wizarding world's traditional understanding. To him, it felt more like the interaction between magical and gravitational fields. Just not something he could put into words. Flitwick moved on to check other students' progress. The room filled again with overlapping chants of Wingardium Leviosa, feathers jerking upward, drifting crookedly, or refusing to budge at all. Alex Rosier had already tried 7 times. His feather either trembled in place or shot up into the ceiling before fluttering back down. On the last attempt, it even let out a thin wisp of smoke. Stop for a moment, Regulus said. Alex jumped. What's wrong? Regulus stepped beside him. Professor Flitwick said to draw an arc. You're pumping your arm up and down. Watch. He rolled his wrist, the wand tracing a smooth curve. Magic should be calm. You look like you're hammering metal. Alex's face flushed. I was afraid I wasn't using enough force. The levitation charm doesn't need force, Regulus said, lowering his hand. It needs precision. Try again. Smooth, continuous motion. Don't break it. He adjusted Alex's posture again and again. Alex wasn't stupid. Just nervous. Maybe that was what it felt like to be a gentle pureblood branch dropped into the heart of a true pureblood nest. Regulus considered it quietly. He needed people like that. Alex took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a few seconds. Wingardium Leviosa. This time, his wrist traced a passable arc. The feather wobbled, lifted 2 inches off the desk, hovered for 3 seconds, then fell. I did it. Alex's eyes lit up. Not bad, Regulus said with a nod. But there's still resistance. You weren't decisive enough. Keep practicing. Alex nodded hard, gratitude written all over his face. Maybe Black wasn't that scary after all. Regulus returned to his seat. Avery leaned over and whispered, You're far too patient with him. Regulus glanced at him. Avery, do you know why on the Black family tapestry, next to the names that were burned away, there are often a few obscure ones left behind? Avery frowned. Because they're from branch families? Not important enough. Because when the main line made foolish choices, it was the branches that preserved the bloodline, Regulus said evenly. His gaze drifted across the room, as if selecting idiots at random. And you can't guarantee the main line won't produce fools. A few purebloods nearby snickered. The half-bloods and Muggleborns looked over, puzzled by the laughter. Avery fell silent. And besides, Regulus went on, his voice low but carrying just far enough, 30 years from now, when we look back on Hogwarts, we won't only remember who made a feather fly the highest, or who flew the steadiest. We'll remember who sat beside us in class, who copied homework with us, who talked about dreams after lights out. The words drifted to Professor Flitwick as he passed. The small professor paused. He looked up at Regulus, something flickering in his eyes. His mouth opened, as if to say something, then he simply tapped the lectern lightly with his wand. Best to write your own homework, Mr. Black. The classroom erupted in laughter. Chapter 20, A Different Slytherin. The defense against the dark arts classroom on Tuesday afternoon smelled faintly of old leather and dust. Regulus sat in the third row of the Slytherin section, watching the professor at the front of the room. Galatea Merrythought, who liked to introduce herself as a former adventurer, was currently waving her arms with great enthusiasm as she explained how to identify and avoid Grindylows in marshlands. And remember, children, Merrythought declared. If you see bubbles rising to the surface and hear a chittering laugh, retreat immediately. Grindylows loved dragging lone witches and wizards underwater. She flourished her wand, conjuring a hazy outline of a water creature in the air. Clearly, there would be no live specimens today. Tom Riddle, Regulus thought. All because he hadn't been chosen as defense against the dark arts professor, he'd placed a curse on the position. From that point on, no professor lasted more than a year. Some met with accidents. Some were forced to resign. Some vanished outright. A childish, cruel sort of revenge. What made it even more absurd was that the curse seemed to have genuinely affected the quality of teaching. Maybe the professors subconsciously knew the post was cursed and simply went through the motions. Or maybe they were afraid that the better they taught, the harder the curse would strike. Regulus glanced back at the lectern. Merrythought was demonstrating how to use lumos to drive off shadowy creatures lurking in dark corners, but the light flickered unevenly, as if reflecting her own lack of focus. First-year material was shallow to an almost insulting degree. Identify a few low-level dark creatures. Learn basic defensive gestures. Memorize safety rules. All of it was covered in the first 2 chapters of Dark Forces, a guide to self-defense. The rest of the time should have been spent on practical responses. But there was no practice. Merrythought didn't teach it, and the students didn't seem to mind. If anything, they were pleased. A useless class was still better than a difficult one. Self-study would get them further than this. The library was perhaps the quietest place in Hogwarts. There were no shrieking first years here. Regulus nodded politely to Madame Pants at the entrance and received a severe nod in return. He went straight to the section on magical theory and history. Since starting school, his physical conditioning had continued to improve, with impressive results. But he'd begun to sense a bottleneck. The body was a vessel for the soul. He could make the vessel larger, stronger. But if the water inside didn't increase accordingly, it was nothing more than an empty shell. Pointless. A wizard's power came from magic. And according to mainstream theory, magic originated in the soul and was expressed through mental will. So could the mind itself be trained? He stopped in front of a bookshelf, eyes scanning the spines. Most of the books dealt with meditation, mental focus, and introductory occlumency. The content was basic, but the direction was right. Regulus pulled out a thin volume titled Consciousness and Magic, an examination of ancient meditative practices. The parchment cover was worn. He opened it and saw the first chapter heading. Wizards change reality not through magic, but through will. He read on. Ancient rune wizards believed that magic was a bridge, connecting the inner world to external reality. A powerful will could cross that bridge and leave an imprint on the real world. Weather magic alters the skies. War magic twists the environment. At their core, these are expressions of a wizard's will, forcibly rewriting reality through magic as a medium. Thus, the difference between strong and weak wizards lies not only in magical reserves, but in the strength, clarity, and resonance of their will. Resonance? Regulus closed the book, deep in thought. Why could some wizards cast advanced spells with ease, while others struggled with something as basic as the levitation charm? Beyond age, knowledge, intelligence, and raw magic, what else was there? His thoughts turned to Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard of the century. Regulus knew he was especially skilled in transfiguration. Canon never stated it outright, but Regulus believed Dumbledore could change weather patterns, reshape terrain, and perhaps even more. When magic reached that level, wasn't it will rewriting reality? And Voldemort, his magic was another extreme. More like tearing. The Cruciatus curse tore pain from the body. The killing curse severed life itself. Even Horcruxes were created by ripping apart one's own soul. Those were questions for later, when he had the power to face them. For now, he needed a way to strengthen his mind. He continued searching, nearly combing through the entire shelf, until at last, on the lowest corner level, he found a small booklet with a faded cover. The title was barely legible. Astrological Meditation, Expanding the Mind Through Stargazing. The author's name was blurred, but on the title page, a handwritten note stood out. Those who gaze upon the stars are not bound to the earth. The paths of the stars are the universe's script. Imitate them, understand them, and eventually resonate with them. Resonance again. This was it. Black. A hushed voice came from the aisle between shelves. Regulus looked up to see Lily Evans standing there, arms full of books. On top was a practical analysis of common magical plant poisons. Miss Evans. Regulus closed astrological meditation and slipped it behind a thicker book. Hidden for now. He'd retrieve it later. Looking something up. Lily stepped closer, green eyes bright with curiosity. I heard you said something interesting in charms class. Regulus raised a brow slightly. What did I say? About memories of Hogwarts. Lily set her books down on a nearby table and rolled her sore shoulders. Someone said you told your classmates that in 30 years, what we'd remember most would be the people we copied homework with. It made its way to the Gryffindor common room. A lot of people thought it didn't sound like something a Slytherin would say. Did I put it like that? Regulus thought dryly. I said other things too. You just latched onto the homework part. That idea isn't limited to houses, he said. And it happens to be true. Think back to primary school. I mean Muggle primary school. What do you remember more clearly, your exam rankings, or the classmate who shared an umbrella with you on a rainy day? Lily paused, then laughed softly. The umbrella. First year, I forgot mine, and one of my friend pulled her big floral umbrella over. We both got half soaked, but we laughed all the way to the school gate. Exactly. Regulus nodded, a hint of a smile in his eyes. Magic doesn't change that. Wizards are still people. We just happen to have magic. Lily looked at him, visibly energized. You're not what I imagined a Slytherin would be like. Regulus met her gaze but didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he asked, do you know why the 4 houses attend classes together? Lily thought for a moment. So we can understand each other better. Partly. More practically, because after graduation, houses don't exist anymore. When you join the Ministry of Magic, your co-workers might be Slytherins. If you go to St. Mungo's, your healer could be a Ravenclaw. When you shop, the store owner might be a Hufflepuff. And if you become an Auror, the person you arrest might be a Gryffindor. Houses are labels for a school. They're not brands burned onto you for life. Lily was quiet for a few seconds, then said softly, thank you for saying that. I'd never really thought about it. Everyone is different, Regulus said seriously. Houses are just rough categories. They shouldn't define everything. There are narrow-minded people in Ravenclaw. Ambitious ones in Hufflepuff. And in Slytherin. Lily picked it up with a smile. There are people who know how to share an umbrella. Regulus's lips curved faintly. Perhaps. Lily Evans had already been personally acknowledged by Slughorn as a prodigy in potions. Canon made that clear. Her talent rivaled Severus Snape's. Regulus's future path would require top-tier potion support. Some needs could be taken openly to Slughorn. But the more sensitive ones would demand a private, trustworthy collaborator. Slughorn was useful, but he was also an information hub. Any request could become gossip in his club. Snape could be motivated by benefit, knowledge traded for secrets, but that kind of relationship rested on a dangerous balance. The moment interests conflicted, it would collapse. Snape had never been a good man. A friendship built on mutual respect was far more stable. And Lily Evans herself was a key node in the fabric of this world. In the future, she would serve as a bridge between eras. A success story for Muggleborns. The mother of Harry Potter. The emotional core of many tragedies and turning points. Building a friendship with her was like tying a thread of his own into the weave of fate. One day, when he needed a potion no one could know about, when he needed an absolutely reliable partner, Regulus was almost certain she would help him.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.